Have you heard of dark manipulation tricks? Sure, but can you spot them before they start, break them on the first move? Protect yourself from the smartest version, even when it's wearing a friendly face? In this video, we won't just name the tricks. We'll take them apart. How they work, why they hook smart people, and the exact lines and steps to shut them down on the spot. You might think you've heard some of these before, but here you'll get what you haven't. New angles, hidden tells, and rapid response scripts you can use the moment this video ends. If you're always half a step late in these situations, this is for you. We'll hit empathy masks, strategic silence, invisible contracts, and finish with a rapid field guide and a 60-second self-test to map your weak spots. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next chapters. Take a breath, because after the next few minutes you'll see the same games with totally different eyes, ready to spot the play and end it. Trick 1. The mask of empathy. When kindness becomes control. It starts as a rescue that doesn't look like a rescue, a hand extended not from above, but from beside you, palm up, eyes soft, the precise tone that makes your shoulders drop. They ask the question you've craved without admitting it to anyone. How are you really? Not the small talk version, your unedited answer. You test the water with a smaller truth, something safe enough to retract if needed, and they hold it carefully, naming its textures, connecting it to something human and ancient, so you don't feel foolish for hurting. The relief is like oxygen after a long staircase. You speak a little more. The listening is skilled, reflective, present, unhurried, and it seems to place you at the center without making you perform. You begin to associate this person with clarity, with feeling seen, with the first quiet after weeks of inner noise. Advice arrives in the form of caring observations, never imperatives, just gentle nudges. Maybe skip that gathering. You always come back drained. You shine when you focus. Why not protect your mornings? You deserve kinder people. Maybe create a little space from the ones who don't get you. None of it is obviously controlling. In fact, it appears aligned with your health. You call it maturity to follow such counsel, and perhaps it is, for a while. But care becomes choreography, by degrees. The nudges begin to pre-sort your calendar. You float an idea and watch their face to learn if it is good for you, until your excitement anticipates their appraisal before it arises. You consult their future version of you, persona they've curated with intimate knowledge of your fears, to decide what present you is allowed to attempt. Gratitude tightens the loop. How can you defy the one who stayed up with you when the night was ugly? Their memory of your pain becomes a kind of authority. They replay it at key moments, white glove handling your old wounds to remind you what a fall would cost. This is where kindness becomes a ledger. Every favor is an entry, every concession you make is a payment. Every independent impulse, if it conflicts with their sense of your healing, becomes a debt. If you pull away, they don't rage, they ache. They list the moments they were there, the 2 a.m. call, the ride when everything felt like it would collapse, the way they believed in you when you didn't. That phrasing is a velvet shackle. You are now tasked with not breaking the heart of your healer. Your language adapts. You start sentences with, "My therapist says," except the therapist is a person who appointed themselves to the role without the oath. Their empathy has rules. It expands when you align, withdraws into cool disapproval when you choose without their editorial. You feel that withdrawal like winter and move to restore spring. If anyone asks, you call the adjustments boundaries or self-care, because that's the vocabulary they taught you, a lexicon that legitimizes their preferences as your well-being. The hallmark of the mask is that you cannot point to one brutal moment. There's no scene that would convince a jury. Instead, there's a series of benevolent calibrations that leave you insured against the risk of being yourself. You fold before you're asked, rehearse before you speak, cancel before you're late. The mask of empathy doesn't imprison you with bars. It redesigns the map so that all roads toward your autonomy look like cliffs and all paths toward their approval resemble safe, well-lit sidewalks. And because kindness has been weaponized in many people's histories, it's almost unsayable to accuse it. If you name what's happening, you feel like a traitor to the language of tenderness. So you stay and call the shrinking healing, until the day you notice that your favorite songs are quiet now, your colors washed, your appetite disciplined into politeness. That's the signal. When you realize you are more manageable than you are alive. The way out is paradoxical. You must grieve the loss of a type of care that genuinely soothed you while refusing its claim on your direction. You can appreciate the steadiness they offered at your worst without agreeing that they own your best. You can say thank you and no in the same breath. The mask will slip when you do, because real empathy survives refusal. Only control interprets. Your autonomy is ingratitude. If their warmth chills when you choose yourself, believe the weather report. It was never spring. It was climate control. Trick 2, the whispered seed, making you believe it was your idea. They rarely command. Commands leave fingerprints, and fingerprints can be traced. Instead, they lean into the art of suggestion delivered in the voice of your own conscience. I wonder if you've outgrown that scene, they say like someone, admiring how tall you've become against an old doorframe. You're brightest when you aren't stretched thin, they add, barely tethered to any request. The statement is true enough to pass inspection, and that's the point. Persuasion. By plausible sincerity. The seed falls into soil already loosened by your private doubts. You turn it over later alone and it sounds like your thought. You water it with reasons that pre-exist them. The party that left you empty, the friend who missed your milestone, the ambition that scares you because it might fail publicly. Days pass. The seed germinates as a plan you present proudly. Your plan. You cancel, pivot, decline. They nod modestly, pleased not with victory, but with your clarity. It feels like growth because it came from inside. You can't see the gardener's hand. One seed doesn't enslave a garden, but a season's worth begins to redirect the landscape. You cannily adopt a dozen self-chosen adjustments that correlate suspiciously with their comfort. Your world narrows into a path of least resistance, least for them. In conversations, you find yourself defending these choices with surprising zeal. We guard what we believe we authored. Pride fortifies the seedling into a small ideology. They barely need to maintain it. They offer light sprinkles of validation every so often. I always knew you were discerning. You're so good at protecting your energy. And you continue pruning your life according to a blueprint you call intuition. The brilliance of the whispered seed is not that it changes your mind. It drafts your identity as the champion of the change. You become the salesperson of your own reduction, rehearsing arguments on their behalf without realizing you're doing marketing. The tactic achieves its apex in conflict. If anyone questions the new you, you mount a defense that spares them and indicts the skeptic. This is just who I am now. And it's partly true. People evolve. The manipulation is in the timing and the concentration. How neatly your evolution sidesteps the parts of you that inconvenience them while leaving untouched the habits that serve them. Should you try to trace the origin of a specific shift, the trail disappears into your diary of ancient doubts. Clever manipulators seed adjacent to pre-existing anxieties so that any forensic analysis returns an honest result. You did feel this way once. They rely on your integrity to shield their interference. Because you're honest, you remember that prior discomfort and stop the investigation. Resistance requires a new ritual, slow thinking around major turns, and a second opinion from someone, uninvested in the outcome. Ask yourself who benefits if you refrain, resign, retreat, and who loses if you expand, attempt, insist. Write the thought on paper and interrogate its ancestry. Did I first consider this after a conversation with them? What did they gain from my clarity? Would I still choose this if they were neutral or absent? The answers needn't shame you out of good decisions. They need to break the spell that your mind is immune to pollen. If the person in question is healthy, they'll welcome the scrutiny, even disagree with some of the results. If they're manipulative, they'll call your audit a lapse in loyalty or a paranoia fed by others who don't understand you like I do. Translation: the seed doesn't like sun. Trick 3. The mirror game, reflecting you to rewrite you. At first it's joy, pure, uncomplicated recognition. They laugh at the odd corner of a joke you thought only you noticed. They order the one menu item you've always defended. They're loud, not to be interesting, but because they can't not. They know the song's bridge you replay and the movie scene you quote that others always miss. You feel located, less like a satellite and more like a constellation. The mirror is not flattery, it's resonance, and resonance is how we decide where to sing. You sing, you open, you disclose. The mirror gleams brighter, capturing the angles you most like, returning them framed by their fascination. If you've spent years as your own archivist, carrying proof of yourself because no one else kept the files, this is dizzying relief. Gradually, the frame thickens. The suggestion arrives wrapped in perfect familiarity. This is so you, they say, praising a strength you trust. But that thing, I don't know. It doesn't feel like you anymore. The mirror tilts, not to deny you, but to refine you into your truest shape. You accept the adjustment because it is delivered in the dialect of your soul. You trim a hobby that used to delight you because you're outgrowing it. You reshape how you speak in certain rooms because the cadence is not quite your real voice. You reconsider ambitions because they belong to an old version of you, a version they say they loved but have seen you transcend. It feels like evolution to comply. The mirror's authority comes from how accurately it once reflected and from the affection that accompanied the reflection. But the mirror's game is authorship. Reflection becomes instruction. Instruction becomes editorial veto. You pre-edit before you express, aiming to be the you they first loved or the you they now curate. You notice that the mirror shows a certain consistency. It affirms what is easy for them and troubles what is demanding. A goal that would require them to share space with your excellence begins to look off-brand for your essence. A friend who challenges their centrality begins to feel not in alignment with you. You find yourself repeating their phrases, feels like me, not my frequency, as if you invented them. Your internal barometer reorients to their weather report. The cost is subtle. You outsource your becoming to the person most invested in a version of you that fits their narrative. The litmus test is misalignment that you choose anyway. Healthy mirrors handle disagreement. They can hold a you that expands beyond their lines. Manipulative mirrors crack loudly at the first sign you might pick a color they can't match. They accuse you of betraying yourself while really meaning you are betraying their portrait. Watch for contempt disguised as concern whenever you follow a thread that doesn't lead back to them. Watch for how the mirror treats your relationships with others. Does it distort them into threats? Does it diminish their intelligence or intentions so your face appears clearer only in one frame? And most of all, watch for how your body feels when you are far from the mirror. If your laughter returns, if your appetite colors outside the palate, if you feel a forgotten spaciousness, trust that as data. Reclaiming yourself is not smashing the glass. It is rehanging it at eye level with a label that reads, One Perspective. Curated. Keep other mirrors, work, craft, friends, solitude around the room. Walk between them and learn the parallax. How truths shift as you move, how no single reflection owns you. If the person resents the gallery, they weren't reflecting. They were arranging. Real love doesn't need to be the only frame on your wall. Trick 4. The power of absence, controlling through silence. It doesn't arrive like punishment. That would be easy to name and push back against. It arrives like weather no one controls. Busy that can't be helped. A schedule that mysteriously clears and clouds according to the barometer of your obedience. One day they are everywhere, a soft blanket of messages and attention. The next, the thread goes cold, not with a bang but with a hush so complete you can hear your own heartbeat speed up. You scroll, you reread, you second-guess the last thing you said. Was it too much, not enough, wrongly timed, poorly phrased? Silence turns your mind into an engine room where guilt is coal and you shovel. This is the engineering. You become the one who closes the circuit they opened, calling, apologizing, reassuring, offering little bargains you wouldn't normally make, volunteering to shrink, to delay, to soothe, just to make the lights come on again. When they finally respond, the relief hits like rain after drought. And because relief is a teacher, you learn. Don't risk the quiet. The next time you feel a no rise in your throat, you remember the blackout and dim yourself first. They never have to say why they vanished. They blame the calendar or the mood, the project or the poor reception where they were, and you agree because you want to keep the channel open. But you notice the pattern if you dare to map it. The silence falls most heavily when you assert a boundary, voice a need, or name a contradiction they'd rather leave unnamed. Absence becomes a lever, and the fulcrum is your nervous system's ancient dread of being cast out of the tribe. The manipulator is not always conscious of the mechanics. Some learned this choreography from their own ghosts, but intent doesn't change effect. You begin to time your requests around their weather, walking your own house like a tenant who put down a deposit in anxiety. You check the sky for signs, a shorter reply, an ellipsis with too much room inside it, a scene with no answer. You edit your sentences to be impossible to misunderstand, which is to say, you write them to be impossible to object to. That is how the soul goes quiet, not under censorship, but under the aspiration to be unarguable. Silence also recalibrates memory. In the quiet, you replay the highlight reel of their tenderness. The brain longs to end suspense with a justification that preserves attachment. You decide they're worth the small contortions. You are not wrong about their good moments. You are wrong about the bargain. Good moments are not a retainer you owe your life for. But the silence tax accumulates. You stop telling certain truths because you predict the blackout. You stop inviting certain friends because you predict the chill. You stop leaving on time, asking directly, laughing too loud, wearing the colors that call attention. Because you are an electrician now, tasked with keeping the grid stable. There's a harsher version too. Sometimes absence is staged at the brink of intimacy. After a confession, a kiss, a plan to integrate lives, the withdrawal converts a promise into a test you didn't study for. You double down, offering proof of your worth, auditioning for the role you thought you already had. This is where the power sharpens. The manipulator gets the benefits of commitment without the duties, your fidelity without theirs, your reparations for damage they caused by turning off the lights. If you ask for clarity, you'll hear words that say nothing. I've been in my head. I need space. I didn't want to burden you. Phrases that sound like care while leaving you in the vestibule of uncertainty. You wait there because you remember warmth from last week. You wait there because leaving a vestibule feels foolish if a door might open any second. Hours become days. Your life arranges itself around a bell that may or may not ring. The antidote isn't counter-silence. That's just another theater of war. The antidote is to move as if the lights might never come back and build a home that doesn't depend on their switch. Practically, that means you do not chase after the second absence. You state your need once clearly without apology, and you let their response teach you who they are. You widen your world while they are small in it. Call the friend. Finish. The work? Go to the place you postponed. You do not punish, you do not beg. You demonstrate to your nervous system that silence is not the same as danger. Healthy people come closer when met with clarity. Only control moves away because clarity ruins its camouflage. If they return warm, but with no accountability for the cold, believe the forecast. Weather is random. Patterns are plans. Your sanity depends on refusing to be a barometer for someone else's storms. Trick 5. The poisoned compliment. Flattery with a hidden blade. It opens with admiration so precise it feels like a fingerprint. You're the most emotionally intelligent person I know. You have the rare ability to take feedback without getting defensive. You're strong enough to hear this. The praise fits and you stand a little taller inside it. Then comes the second clause, the knife laid gently on the table, couched in civility. Which is why I think it's safe to say you were a bit manipulative with Jenna yesterday. Or that video you made was good, but it lacked substance in parts you probably missed. You don't notice the sleight of hand right away because your pride is now an accomplice. To defend yourself risks proving you're not who they just said you were. To question their take risks stepping down from the pedestal they built. So you nod, take notes, thank them for their honesty and swallow something that tastes like self-betrayal but goes down easier than conflict. This tactic thrives in public. The compliment is loud, the cut is surgical. I always tell people, "You're brilliant with logistics," they announce at the meeting before adding, which is why I was surprised you missed last week's follow-through, totally unlike you. Heads turn. You're cornered into performing graciousness about a critique you never consented to receive in that arena. If you wince, you're thin-skinned. If you push back, you're prideful. If you smile and accept, you become responsible, not only for the content of the mistake, but for the maintenance of your admired persona. Soon you're doing unpaid emotional labor to remain the kind of person who can take any blow well. Your reputation becomes the whip that keeps you docile. The poisoned compliment also recruits your values. If you desperately want to be kind, they'll praise your kindness right before using it to justify a request that violates your capacity. If you prize fairness, they'll laud your objectivity right before presenting a lopsided account of events that demands you rule in their favor. They aren't merely flattering you, they're identifying the lever that moves you, then installing it in their hand. The next time they need something, they'll prime you first. I trust your discernment more than anyone's. Who refuses a chance to be the person they most want to be? In this way, your best qualities become the corridor they walk down to reach your compliance. If you do catch the blade and say, ouch, the retreat is pre-written. I was only trying to help. I thought you valued honesty. I guess I misread how strong you are. Notice the trapdoor. Your reaction is now evidence against the very trait they praised. You're pushed to overcorrect, to prove them wrong by accepting even more intrusive truths. And because skillful manipulators sometimes mix valid feedback with their cuts, disentangling becomes harder. You might have missed a follow-through, you might have needed to tighten the work. The issue isn't whether improvement exists, it's who is holding the right to define you, and how they're using your virtues as shackles. The way out is to separate identity from access. You can be emotionally intelligent and still choose the context in which you receive critique. You can be strong and still say, not like this. Script the boundary before you need it. If you have feedback, please bring it privately and concretely. Public praise then pivot isn't helpful. When they try the old move, repeat the script once calmly and disengage. If they're capable of clean communication, they'll adjust. If they're addicted to the performance of being your truth-teller, they'll escalate, often by framing your boundary as proof that you're slipping. That's data. A person who respects you doesn't need to humble you to keep you close. Rebuild your own pedestal, but make sure it's not a trap. Say, I value growth and I'll solicit it from people I trust in ways that keep dignity intact. Practice receiving feedback from sources that don't weaponize your desire to be good. And for every moment you feel the old reflex, grinning while bleeding, remember this: grace is not the same as access, and compliments that require your self-abandonment are insults in formal wear. You can lay them gently on the floor and walk, away in the shoes you bought with your own name. Trick 6, the fragile truth, mastering the art of half-honesty. They don't lie, not in the way you were taught to catch liars. They deliver bright fragments on velvet, a confession polished to a sympathetic shine, a timeline whose edges blur exactly where questions would bite, a sighing, I should have told you sooner, that arrives just early enough to be praised and just late enough to dodge accountability. You're shown a gear, a spring, the face of the watch, never the missing screws between. And because what you're holding is real, you feel cruel for noticing the gaps. The brain hates ambiguity. It stitches the canvas with best-case thread. You tell yourself you're being reasonable. You tell yourself it's progress. You tell yourself the rest will come. But half-honesty is a strategy, not a phase. It drips disclosure at the rate required to keep you invested while preventing you from rearranging the furniture with the whole blueprint in view. When you press the faucet sputters, I'm overwhelmed. This is hard for me. It's complicated. You back off, proud of your patience. What you don't see is the calculus, how each morsel is timed to preempt your exit, how the roughest facts are sanded just before you might touch them. This is how plausible deniability is baked. Every revealed piece can be defended. The concealment of the rest is not lying, merely not yet ready, or not relevant, or I thought it would only hurt you. The burden shifts onto you. If you were kinder, less suspicious, more trusting, you wouldn't be asking for everything all at once. Half honesty thrives in the gray zone between intention and effect. They may even believe the version they're selling. Self-protective stories often feel like truth to the teller. That's what makes this trick seductive for both sides. You can collude with it without noticing, because the partial story protects not only them, but also the hope you're clutching. To demand the rest is to risk losing the fantasy that keeps your world from tilting, so you accept the curated mosaic and call it intimacy. You post it on the wall and squint. Over time, you become skilled at arranging your expectations to fit the art. You don't ask about certain hours. You don't mention certain names. You stop inviting certain conversations because they go nowhere or cause drama. In doing so, you adapt to a reality designed for their comfort. The quiet tragedy is that you become less honest too. You edit your needs down to what the relationship's bandwidth can carry. You learn to swallow your questions whole. Your sensitivity to truth, once an asset, atrophies for lack of use until a day arrives when you can no longer tell if your unease is wisdom or paranoia. That confusion is the point. A person wavering between those two will often choose loyalty to the story they've already paid years into. Recovering your compass requires a devotion to whole pictures. You begin by writing down what you know, what you were told, and what was implied. You highlight the edges where "not yet" has lived for too long. You ask direct questions and refuse to negotiate with fog. I need a clear answer on X. If you can't offer it, I will make my decision without it. That sentence terrifies manipulators because it ends the subsidy their half-truths have enjoyed, your willingness to halt your life for their pacing. And if they respond by accusing you of cruelty, remember, there is nothing kinder than reality. Whole truth hurts once and heals. Half-truths numb and rot. You'll be tempted to prove fairness by offering your own half-truths in return. Don't. Clean hands are less about moral purity than about tactical clarity. When you are whole, you can see. When you are whole, you can leave or stay for reasons that honor both of you. And if you stay, it will be with a person who learns that honesty is a muscle to be trained, not a theater trick to be applauded for at intermission. Trick 7. The emotional pendulum. Addiction to chaos and calm. They are seasons on fast forward, thaw, bloom, drought, storm, then a sudden spring that feels like forgiveness. The swing is not random, it is tuned to your threshold. Just when you are about to break, the warmth returns. An apology that sounds like music, a weekend of tenderness, a mercy you didn't know you still believed in. The body takes notes. It begins to crave the high that follows the low, and because intermittent rewards flood us harder than predictable ones. Your loyalty grows not despite the whiplash, but because of it. You're playing a slot machine with your nervous system. The occasional jackpot makes the losses seem like investment, rather than theft. In the downswings, you absorb blame, call yourself dramatic, impatient, impossible to love. In the upswings, you craft meaning, call it growth, a turning point, a miracle of understanding. You journal, you set rituals, you draw little diagrams of communication styles, all to explain what a casino needs no explanation for. The house always wins. Friends who visit during different weather fight about what they're seeing. They're awful, says the one who stood in the hail. They're trying, says the one who drank the sun. Both are right, and the contradiction keeps you in the middle, conducting an orchestra that can't hear itself. The pendulum also damages time. Bad days feel endless. Good days rewrite the past. Monday's cruelty gets reinterpreted by Fridays. Kiss as a misunderstanding, a misfire, an old wound acting out. You become a historian who constantly revises. Every chapter ends with a paragraph that absolves the villain because the next page is sweet. That's not forgiveness. It's narrative. Held hostage. Slowly you learn to anticipate the swing and behave as if your best self exists only in the return to calm. You over-repair, over-apologize, over-deliver, because you're trying to accelerate the pendulum back to the side where you can breathe. You forget that stillness is a birthright, not a prize. To break the addiction, you have to sit through an entire downswing without bargaining. You have to refuse the casino chips of partial affection. You state your baseline, respect that doesn't evaporate in conflict, tenderness that doesn't require debt. Then you let the next swing arrive and you do not chase it with gifts meant to bribe the weather. This feels like withdrawal because it is. Your body shakes for the rush it's been trained to expect. You keep your hands still. When the warmth returns, you don't treat it like rain after famine. You treat it like the minimum required by any place you're willing to live. Healthy partners can build rhythm. Manipulators need the swing. One learns your steps. The other learns your triggers. Know the difference and decide whether you want to dance or be tossed. Trick 8. The hero's illusion, saving you to own you. They enter your story at a cliff and throw a rope. The rescue is real. Money bridged a gap, a call moved a gate, a presence steadied your shaking hands. Gratitude writes in permanent ink on days like that. You remember details with religious clarity, the time on the oven clock, the way their voice didn't waver, the coffee going cold while they stayed. You tell the tale at dinners how someone showed up. They do too. At first it's pride shared, later it's evidence submitted. Exhibit A, the night I came. Exhibit B, the door I opened. Exhibit C, the person I convinced. You start to hear a subtext you don't want to acknowledge. A ledger has been opened in your name. Ownership here doesn't look like chains. It looks like stewardship. Let me handle the bills. I'm better at this. I'll talk to your friend. They respect me. I think I should weigh in on your schedule. I know your limits. Each offer is nested in the origin story of their heroism. To decline feels ungrateful. To question feels treacherous. In arguments, the rope reappears. As a reminder. Do you forget who called the tow truck at 2 a.m.? You don't. In fact, the memory kneels you. You try to compensate with compliance. Say yes more, ask less. Return the favor by making yourself easy to manage. That is the move. You pay. Back the rescue not with a rescue but with your autonomy. There's a darker angle. Some heroes create the cliff. They destabilize subtly, erode your supports, sow doubt between you and your circle, nudge you toward risks you can't manage, then arrive with the solution and a story about your life before them being a string of disasters. Whether they made the mess or simply love reminding you who mopped, the logic is the same. The more dramatic the rescue, the more authority they claim over the rescued. You can end up living in a house where every decision must pass a test. Does it honor the savior? Gratitude becomes governance, and you become the mayor of a city built on a debt you can never fully repay. What breaks the illusion is a radical reframing of thanks. You thank them loudly and once. You name the rescue, you record the date, you send flowers or words or both, and then you close the transaction with dignity. Your help mattered. It does not make you my keeper. When the past is raised like a scepter, you acknowledge it without letting it rule. Yes, you were there. I am still the authority on my present. If they are good, they will smile and sit down. If they are strategic, they will look wounded, then escalate the myth by retelling it with added music until your heart softens and your will goes soft with it. Do not argue the facts. Argue the jurisdiction. The rope saved you. The rope does not own the cliff. Re-earn your own trust by rescuing yourself in small ways. Fix 5 little things you would have waited for them to fix. Light bulbs, emails, appointments, broken drawers. Build competence where you've outsourced it, not to prove you don't need people, but to feel the ballast return to your legs. Your gratitude will change shape when you do. It will become admiration without obedience, memory without mortgage. Good helpers celebrate that. Only heroes addicted to their cape resent a citizen who can now walk the bridge alone. Trick 9. The slow burn. Training obedience through patience. It never looks like conquest. No flags planted, no ultimatums issued, no cinematic blowout that lets you say, here's where it turned. Instead, it's 1,000 adjustments, the size of a breath. They begin by asking for a small exception couched in reason. Could we skip your friend's event tonight? You looked exhausted last time. You agree because it sounds like care, because you can miss one evening without the sky cracking. Nothing breaks. This is important. So your nervous system learns that yielding is safe, even smart. The next request lands just adjacent. Could you text me when you arrive just so I don't worry? It's not a command, it's a concern. You nod, and the line inches forward. Increment becomes architecture. A preference becomes pattern, and pattern pretends to be personality. The things you used to do by default, spontaneity, late art, long calls with old friends, now require petitions. You still do some of them, which is why you tell yourself you're free. But the radius has shrunk and you plan every joy around an invisible perimeter. They don't shout when you cross it, they sigh. They don't explode, they pull away half, an inch. You chase that half inch with compromises that sound like maturity in your own mouth. I'm just being thoughtful. I'm not 22 anymore. This is what partnership looks like. All of which might be true in a healthy covenant. What's missing is reciprocity. Their requests grow. Yours get folded into later. The slow burn is a master at plausible deniability. Each ask can be defended in court. Any one of them could be called reasonable. Stack them, though, and you've built a narrow hallway through which only the most obedient version of you can pass without bruising. You start pre-approving your choices with their likely reaction in mind, rehearsing answers that preempt their disappointment. You call it harmony. It's choreography. You apologize for springing things on them so you stop springing joy on yourself. You call it respect. It's rationing. They time the heat like a seasoned chef. Apply pressure, back off, apply a little more, back off longer, always calibrating to your threshold so you never leap from the pot. When you do voice discomfort, I miss my people. I need a Saturday for myself. I want to travel alone once this year. The answer is a cushion of words that softens you into staying. Of course, babe. Let's look at dates. And then the calendar mysteriously never opens, or the week you choose becomes the week of a crisis, or your plan is green-lit with an asterisk that converts autonomy into an errand. Go, but text me every hour. I worry. You return home having proved you can be free in a way that doesn't cost them anything. You file it under balance, and the pot simmers on. Memory fades differently in long heat. You forget that you used to say yes to yourself without convening a committee. You forget how loud you laughed without bracing for a debrief. When someone new meets you in this season, they call you grounded, and the compliment lands because you have indeed learned to stand still. The part of you that ran through fields is bored to the point of sleep. You tell it to be grateful. Gratitude is holy. That's why it's so often misused. Thankfulness for comfort should not require the burial of appetite. If you try to chart the distance between then and now, you'll struggle to pick a mile marker. That's the trick's brilliance. You can't indict a single day, so you indict yourself for overreacting. You call a friend, attempt to tell the story, hear yourself fumble, and conclude that nothing is wrong. But your body remembers. It remembers. The friction you no longer generate, the dreams you archived under later, the friendships that thinned because they complicated the perimeter. Listen to the ache that shows up when you plan something that delights only you. That ache is the scar tissue from small cuts you were told were kisses. The way out looks like disrespect from the inside because you've been trained to equate self-assertion with harm. It isn't. It is a reset in the smallest units possible. A no where you used to volunteer, a Saturday reclaimed without apology, a message sent after the event rather than before, a trip planned and booked before you. Ask permission from a dynamic that was never supposed to be your government. Expect heat when you do this. Expect narratives. You're changing, you're selfish, you don't care how this affects me. The slow burn will try to turn down the flame by turning up the guilt. Hold your line long enough for your nervous system to learn a new association, that not everything that makes someone else uncomfortable is unsafe. When their discomfort becomes chronic sabotage rather than honest negotiation, name it for what it is, an attempt to return you to the hallway, and walk out of that house. Trick 10. The hook of helpfulness. Generosity that binds. They are the person everyone calls because they always answer, and you're grateful to be on that list. They appear with jumper cables, spreadsheets, soup. They fix the leak, iron your pitch, find the discount code, send the article before you knew you needed it. The care is real, and that's what makes this trick so hard to name without sounding ungrateful. You didn't imagine the rides to clinics and airports, the money that bridged a month, the time they spent designing your website while you slept. You said, Thank you, meaning every syllable. Gratitude is healthy. Dependence is human. Weaponized. Helpfulness begins when the ledger appears. It doesn't arrive as an invoice. It shows up in tones. You mention a boundary and watch their face fall like you've kicked a saint. You decline an ask and feel the temperature drop 5 degrees. Later, in an unrelated argument, the favors roll out like exhibits. I've always been there for you. Who else would have done what I did? You've said those lines about them to other people. Hearing them as a warrant for obedience unsettles you. You promise yourself you'll be extra appreciative, make it, even earn the right to say no sometime soon. Except soon never comes, because the generosity is continuous, and your repayment plan keeps resetting with each new kindness. The hook is forged out of identity. They're the giver, you're the grateful one. You start managing your needs to protect that harmony. You share less of what's heavy because heavy triggers help, and help accrues debt you can't discharge. You stop asking for support from anyone else because their standard makes others look careless, or because comparison might break the spell. Your world narrows to 2 points: your problem and their solution. In that line, your autonomy fades. You choose jobs that won't make you busier than their schedule can tolerate. You soften friendships that would make you less available to their needs. You preemptively cancel on yourself because you know a favor might be needed, and being unavailable would threaten the story that you're always there for each other. Sometimes they don't say a word. You say it for them in your head whenever you contemplate an independent move. After everything they've done, you volunteer to drive, to host, to fix, to loan. Because fairness has curdled into penance, you call it reciprocity, but reciprocity has an off switch. This hook does not. And when you do, finally refuse, perhaps because your exhaustion overwhelms, your manners, the mask twitches. You're met with woundedness that demands caretaking, or with a moral audit of all the ways your refusal proves who you really are. You end up comforting the person who made your boundary necessary, and the lesson writes itself. It is less costly to accept help than to recover from declining it. That is the costliest math of all. There is another variant: helpfulness as camouflage. People who fear abandonment sometimes build economies of usefulness so dense that no one dares leave. If you express the desire to widen your circle, they double their investment. More favors, more availability, more, "Don't worry, I've got it." It's hard to argue with abundance. It's harder to see how abundance can be a moat. Ask yourself if your gratitude ever buys you quiet. If thank you is always followed by a new obligation, you're in a marketplace, not a relationship. Untangling yourself requires replacing gratitude as debt with gratitude as celebration. You can thank them without hiring them to supervise your life. You can accept help without accepting governance. Script sentences that are true and closed. Thank you. That was generous and mattered, instead of I owe you. When a favor is offered attached to a condition, separate them. I'd love the help. I won't be able to commit to what you're asking in exchange. Watch the reaction. Healthy. Givers either withdraw the favor, fair, or give it cleanly, healthier. Manipulative givers insist the strings are part of the gift. Without them, they feel unrecognized. In that case, decline consistently. You are not rejecting care. You are refusing a loan that compounds interest in guilt. Finally, diversify your support. Teach your nervous system that many hands can carry you, including your own. The more competent you feel at meeting your needs, the less susceptible you'll be to offers that come with invisible contracts. And when you do ask this person for help, because you still might, make it a purchase you both understand, specific, time-bound, with thanks that don't morph into tithes. Love is not measured by how many tasks you perform for each other. It's measured by how easily you can say no without the story threatening to collapse. Trick 11. The false mirror, making you doubt what you see. It starts small, a raised eyebrow when you describe your experience, a gentle correction that recasts the scene. That's not what she meant. You're reading into it. You're tired. Let's revisit tomorrow. The tone isn't scolding. It's protective, as if they're saving you from a misinterpretation that would embarrass you later. You accept the edit because you've been wrong before, because humility is a virtue, and certainty can make fools of anyone. Besides, their version is tidier and hurts less. Who wouldn't trade the sting of betrayal for the sweetness of benign intent? You go to bed calmer, grateful for their perspective. But the edits accumulate. The patterns you suspect are downgraded to coincidences. The promises you remember are rephrased into suggestions. Your own emotions are recategorized as triggers, and while triggers are real, not every alarm is. Trauma echoing. Some are fires now. The mirror insists that smoke is steam. When you flinch, you're told it's the past talking. When you connect dots, you're warned against conspiracy thinking. When you ask for accountability, you're accused of being punitive. The result is elegant. You become ashamed of your own perception. You start preemptively translating your observations into a dialect that will be acceptable in the mirror's frame. And in that translation, the sharp edges that would have protected you go dull. The false mirror thrives on confidence. The more certain they sound, the more plausible their reality feels. They might cite studies, memories, your astrological chart, their therapist's name, bonus points if you've never met the therapist. They might quote you to yourself with archival precision, excluding the sentences that would complicate their thesis. In conflicts, they walk you back through the timeline, highlighting every place you misheard or overreacted until you are apologizing for the audacity of having eyes. You learn to defer, to ask them to read the room on your behalf. You outsource your most primal faculty, sight, then wonder why you keep bumping into furniture. There's a compassionate variant. They believe they are keeping you safe from the chaos of raw life. To them, your revised memory is a gift-wrapped version of events that goes down easier and preserves the bond. But safety that requires blindness is custody. If the price of belonging is an edited mind, you're not loved. You're curated, and curation will always tilt toward the curator's comfort. Notice whose mistakes get softened, whose narratives get airtime, whose tears halt the conversation. If the mirror mostly protects them, even when it claims to be protecting you, call it by its real purpose, maintaining power through plausibility. How do you get your sight back? You gather data outside the mirror. You write what was said immediately after it's said, not as evidence to fight with later, but as a lifeline to yourself. You ask neutral witnesses, what did you hear? You don't accept summaries. You request quotes. You track patterns over calendar pages instead of by mood. You set one small experimental boundary and observe meticulously what happens, not what is explained to have happened. When the mirror attempts to reframe your notes, you say, we can hold different interpretations, I'm acting on mine. That sentence terrifies false mirrors because it evacuates the arena where their certainty wins. You refuse to litigate your senses. You legislate your behavior. Expect to be called stubborn, unfair, reactive, even abusive. Strong words are deployed. To make you drop the thread, keep it. You're not prosecuting them, you're protecting your instrument panel. In a healthy bond, your discernment will be welcomed even when inconvenient. In a controlling one, it will be treated as a weapon. That's your diagnostic. Choose accordingly, and if you leave, remember that seeing clearly after fog can feel cruel only because you trained yourself to prefer clouds. The horizon is sharp because it's real. Trick 12, the scarcity trap, fabricating urgency to make you chase. There's a timer on everything. Love, forgiveness, tickets, apartments, jobs, belonging. If we don't decide tonight, the opportunity is gone. I can't promise I'll feel this way next week. This is a once-in-a-lifetime window. Maybe sometimes that's true. Time is real, doors close. Manipulation borrows the costume of reality and rushes you into choices that serve the rusher. The breathless pitch collapses the future into a narrow now, where questions feel like betrayal and caution feels like cowardice. You sprint through the doorway with your eyes half shut, and later, when the bill arrives, you're told you ordered freely. Scarcity's sleight of hand is to convert your fear of missing out into proof that you wanted the thing more than you wanted wisdom. Urgency distorts value. Mediocre offers sparkle under a countdown clock. Painful relationships look rare when framed as, this kind of intensity doesn't come twice. Jobs that underpay feel golden when the recruiter speaks in limited seats, and we need an answer by EOD. The body, wired to secure resources, mistakes noise for signal. Your pulse adds decimals to their claims. Meanwhile, the manipulator is insulated from scrutiny. Speed is the enemy of inspection, and so long as you're rushing, you're not reading the contract. You're not calling a friend. You're not sleeping on it. Sleep being the oldest, truest antivirus for bad decisions. Some scarcity traps are moral. You're told that grace has an expiration date, that forgiveness must be immediate or it isn't real, that if you don't reconcile by dawn, you never really loved them. That's how people get shoved into premature peace, accepting terms that heal nothing. Other traps are romantic. I'm not the settling type. If you hesitate, I'll assume you're not serious, which translates to, I demand your commitment while I keep my options open. Still others are spiritual. The universe rewards decisive energy, as if caution were a sin. The thread, tying them together, is a symmetry. The urgency benefits one side and binds the other. The antidote is ritualized delay. You announce to yourself and to others, my decisions sleep once. 24 hours doesn't kill real opportunities. It only kills illusions that required adrenaline to survive. When pressed, you name the pressure. I hear the timeline. That timeline doesn't work for me. You'll be accused of letting life pass you by. Let pass what requires panic to say yes to. Make space for what can stand still, long enough to meet your eyes. If the person or offer evaporates in that pause, it wasn't an opportunity. It was a net. Scarcity also shrinks imagination. Under the gun, we flip coins we could have replaced. Practice writing third options where they offer two. If the choice is forgive now or lose me, try I won't decide forgiveness under threat. If you need to leave, leave. If the choice is sign today or the role goes away, try then the role goes away. I only accept roles I can read and sleep on. This is not drama. It's adult tempo. And if you feel the old terror of missing the train, being left behind, ending up with nothing, tell the truth about why that fear grew so large. Someone taught you that time is a predator. Someone taught you that love keeps score by speed. Replace them as your teacher. Here's the quiet secret. Abundance isn't a vibe you manifest. It's a practice of keeping your hands open long enough to let pretenders fall through. You don't need 1,000 options. You need one real one that doesn't punish you for breathing. You don't need to be chosen before sunset. You need to be respected after sunrise. Scarcity can't survive your insistence on pace. Slow is, not the opposite of brave. Slow is how courageous choices land on both feet. Trick 13. The authority mask. Power hidden behind expertise. They don't tell you what to do. They teach you why you should already know. The first time they speak, the room tilts toward them almost involuntarily. Acronyms arrange themselves into arguments. Case studies march across your doubt like disciplined soldiers. Their voice isn't loud, just low and settled. The kind that sounds unbothered by being challenged, because it has never had to survive without being believed. You relax. Competence is oxygen in a world of posturing, and they have the calm pulse of someone who has read the manual in a fire. You start borrowing their phrases to make sense of your life, because good language is a ladder, and they keep handing you rungs. Then the ladder becomes a rail. Your questions do not receive curiosity, they receive remediation. That's a common misconception. They begin, inserting you into a category where your doubts can be filed away with everyone else's errors. You feel smaller, and, paradoxically, more grateful, rescued from ignorance you didn't know you were drowning in. The boundary between expertise and entitlement dissolves molecule by molecule. Soon your hunches are anecdata, your instincts uncontrolled variables, your lived experience N of 1. They are not wrong about methods, they are wrong about jurisdiction. Science should guide a bridge's weight limits. It should not adjudicate whether you're allowed to cross. The mask works best when it wears credentials, degrees, citations, institutional logos, a contact list that opens doors labeled members only. The robe of legitimacy cloaks the power move underneath. Trust me because the building trusts me. You do until the building's rules begin to govern your kitchen, your bedroom, your faith. Who you love becomes a compliance issue. What you want becomes a threat model. Every why you offer is rerouted into according to best practices, which is a soft way of saying your questions are not sovereign here. You learn to fear being unreasonable more than you fear being unhappy. That's when they win, when your desire asks permission from their language before it speaks. In conflict, the authority mask performs benevolence. I don't want to control you, they say. I want to protect you from mistakes I've seen. 100 times. The stories are persuasive, cautionary tales where people just like you were saved by listening. You do not notice the selection bias. They never tell the stories where defiance built something beautiful, because those are inconvenient to both their pride and their pedagogy. If you persist, they escalate to diagnostics. Your resistance becomes a symptom, your pace a pathology. This is your avoidant attachment, your scarcity mindset, your cognitive distortion. Labels can be helpful until they become latches. Once a door is named, it is easier to close it without noticing you've locked someone in. There is a kinder variant. They really do know more about some things, and they love you the way a master loves an apprentice, fiercely, possessively, wanting your craft to sing as loudly as theirs, without ever letting you risk a note they haven't approved. Apprenticeship can be holy. It becomes a prison when graduation is delayed indefinitely by moving goalposts. You'll know you're in a prison when your I think has to masquerade as research shows to be granted airtime. The antidote is not anti-intellectualism. It is sovereignty. You can honor expertise without outsourcing your agency. Practice this sentence until it sits comfortably in your mouth. I respect your knowledge. I'm still choosing X. Watch what happens next. Healthy authority steps. Back maybe offers a final caution with love, and then lets the consequences teach. Masked authority tightens grip, questions your sanity, marshals consensus against you, or withdraws warmth until you submit. Name what you see. You're asking me to accept your framework as my fate. I won't. Then rebuild your internal panel. Keep a circle of advisors who don't agree with each other, so no single doctrine monopolizes your discernment. Rotate your teachers. Read beyond one canon, wade into the raw water of trying and failing without a spreadsheet to bless every start. And when you defer, and you will because we all must, do it consciously for a time, for a reason, with an exit, not because a tone told you your life is an IRB application. You are not a study, you are a person. Experts may help you polish the key. Only you decide which doors you unlock. Trick 14. The reciprocity snare, giving to take control. The gift arrives custom cut to your ache. It is not random generosity. It is intimacy with a bow on it. The book that names your unnamed, the favor that unclogs the weak, the call that leaps the queue when everyone else would have let it ring. It lands you in the warmest corner of being known. You thank them sincerely. You want to reciprocate naturally. Your nervous system, tuned by millennia of tribe life, begins to hum the reciprocity song. When the fire is shared, bring wood. That's how we survive. Manipulation doesn't fight the song. It remixes it. At first, the exchange seems fair. They help you move. You help them ship a project. They listen to your 2 a.m., you attend their launch. Then the algebra goes strange. Their gifts start to arrive unasked, bundled with a subtle choreography for your next steps. Don't worry, I already handled it. They say about something that touches your autonomy. An email to your boss, a message to your family, a decision about your money. Gratitude blunts the alarm. You accept the preemptive saving and swallow. The discomfort of having been written into a play without seeing the script. When you finally express unease, they look hurt, not angry, wounded that you would turn a kindness into a complaint. You apologize for complaining about kindness. The ledger updates. You owe not just for the gift, but for the sin of questioning it. Soon your preferences begin consulting the ledger first. Want to travel? You calculate what that would mean relative to their last 3 favors. Want a quiet night? You measure it against the hours they invested in your crisis last month. You walk through your own life with a cashier's brain, scanning for ways to stay square. It would be one thing if a single clean act of reciprocity zeroed the account, but the snare is designed to erase zeros. Every repayment resurrects a prior, "You never could have done this without me," and new generosity keeps the balance strategically unsatisfied. Your gratefulness becomes a treadmill. Sometimes they never mention it. You do. The story you tell yourself after everything they've done becomes preventive obedience. You volunteer for duties you dislike because some internal creditor demands interest. You refrain from healthy conflict because you shouldn't make their life harder. You become the guardian of their feelings as penance for all the times they buffered yours. Your identity tilts. You are the upheld, the one who owes, the one whose no would be indecent. Love turns into accountancy with nicer stationery. There's an uglier version. The gift that creates dependency on purpose. They solve problems you're fully capable of learning to solve, and they do it so quickly, so well, that your competence atrophies in the shadow of their speed. Your gratitude then has a twin: fear. You fear the day they stop giving, the day you will be left to face your unpracticed life. That fear is stabilizing for them. It seats them at the head of a table you set. How do you step off the treadmill without turning cold? You separate gratitude from governance. Say thank you completely and then treat your choices as unpaid. If a favor arrives fused to an expectation, split them. I appreciate the help. I'm not agreeing to X. If you're offered an unsolicited rescue that crosses a boundary, decline the crossing even while you appreciate the intention. Please, don't email my boss for me. It matters that I do that myself. Thank you for caring. Watch the outcome. True givers will recalibrate. Transactional souls will suggest your boundary is proof you're selfish or ungrateful. They needed your debt more than they needed your good. Rebuild your muscle memory of asking others, plural, and yourself. Diversify who you let lift you, and practice lifting yourself clumsily until your hands remember. Then, when you reciprocate, make it a gift, not a payment. Give in ways that do not obligate, and let your generosity model a different economy. I did this because I wanted to, not to buy a vote later. You'll start to feel the difference viscerally. Debt sits heavy in the stomach. Thanks sits warm in the chest. Learn the sensation and refuse to confuse them again. Trick 15, the isolation loop, breaking you through loneliness. Control doesn't always lock the door. Sometimes it simply dimly lights the room you're already in and points out every flaw in the view outside. They don't really see you. They whisper about your friends. They're jealous. They hum about your wins. They drain you. They say about the people who have opinions other than theirs. Separation is framed as self-care, then as self-respect, then as spiritual hygiene, until your circle evaporates under a mist of wise-sounding reasons. You start saying no to invitations you once said yes to, not because you are tired, but because you are tired of the post-game analysis with the person who claims to love you best. It begins to feel easier to stay home. You tell yourself you're maturing, simplifying, focusing. The relief is real. Conflict decreases because there are fewer variables. Your calendar looks clean enough to photograph. But quiet has a second edge. When rupture arrives inside the relationship that thinned your world, there is no balcony where friends can pull you up. No chorus of familiar voices to mirror you back to yourself. The manipulator becomes your weather report, and then your climate. Disagreement grows costly because it risks the only hearth left burning. You are more likely to concede than to feel the cold again. This is the loop. Isolation begets dependency, and dependency makes isolation feel rational. When you try to reach out, at first a tentative coffee, then a longer call, you're met with soft indictments. I thought we wanted more use time. I just don't think they're good for your energy. Why do you need them if I'm here? The question is designed to insult itself. Why do you need air if I have water? Because you are human, and humans are ecosystem creatures. We think better in plurality. We heal faster in chorus. We remain safer. When no single person holds all the mirrors, there's a martyr version of the loop. They sacrifice visibly for you. Jobs declined, trips cancelled. I chose you over. And then hold that sacrifice up whenever you step out. You are cast as ungrateful for refusing a closeness you never requested at that price. Guilt seasons. The food you eat with them, and you keep eating because hunger is worse. The tragedy is that your world shrinks precisely when your concerns grow. The fewer inputs, the louder their voice. The louder their voice, the less likely you are to notice that your laughter has a new ceiling. Breaking the loop requires doing the thing your nervous system fears most: disappointing the person who made themselves your only shelter. Start with small exits: an hour with a friend who knows the uncurated you, a class that meets weekly, a community that doesn't ask for proof of fealty to let you in. Expect interference. Expect sudden crises on nights you're due to go out. Subtle sulks. When you return, a halo of "I just missed you" that will try to rewrite your absence as betrayal. Do not litigate the feelings. Name the pattern. When I connect elsewhere, you get anxious and try to pull me back. I won't live in that pattern. Repeat it gently, like a GPS, until the car learns the route. Repopulate your life with witnesses who remember you from before the hallway narrowed. Call the person who loved your loud laugh. Join the space where your ambition isn't pathologized. Relearn the hobby that doesn't fit in their calendar. And if the relationship cannot tolerate the rewilding of your ecosystem, consider that. The love in question required a terrarium to look like a forest. True intimacy is not threatened by other bonds. It is strengthened by the aliveness you bring back from them. The only love endangered by your plurality is the kind that confuses devotion with monopoly. Trick 16. The subtle mockery. Insults dressed as humor. They call it teasing, and maybe the first time it even lands like affection, the intimacy of being seen closely enough to be ribbed. You chuckle, because laughter is cheaper than asking for care, and you don't want to be the person who can't take a joke. But jokes teach rooms what is safe to say. If you become the running gag, the room learns to keep laughing. The subject matter is always something you've privately worried about. The way you mispronounce certain words, the time you froze on stage, your messy car, your earnestness when you love something, your softness when others go hard. They bring it up with impeccable timing, when new people are around, when you have just spoken vulnerably, when you need the room to treat you as credible. The punchline lands on your face. You start to preempt the bit by doing it yourself. I know, I'm the one who... Offering up your own dignity as a human shield. You frame it as strategic, get ahead of the narrative and you control it. But self-mockery is a solvent. It thins the part of you that needed protection in the first place. Over time, what began as a way to keep your footing becomes a script you can't stop reading, even when no one's laughing anymore. You become the person least likely to take your gifts seriously. That makes it easier for everyone else not to. When you finally ask them to stop, they tell you they're calibrating you for the world. If you can't handle me, how will you handle them? As if cruelty were vitamin C and you'll catch a cold without it. Or they'll insist you're mishearing the love in their voice. They'll list in glowing terms all the things they admire about you, as if admiration buys the right to bruise. I tease you because you're strong. No, you endure it because you're strong. They often escalate when you shine. Nothing tempts a mocker like a moment you start to believe in yourself. They will try to reset the hierarchy with a laugh that puts you back where they can see over you. The remedy isn't humorlessness, it's precision. Draw a circle around what's off limits with language that leaves no performative exits. Jokes about my stutter, weight, competence are not okay. I won't be around for them. Then enforce it like gravity, by leaving when gravity is defied. You don't need a courtroom or a committee, you need your feet. The first time you walk, you'll be accused of oversensitivity. Let them practice sensitivity on their own time. When the mockery returns as just a slip, treat it as data, not drama. Patterns, not apologies, are the truth. If you still want this person in your life, rebuild the play space with consent. Invite a humor that doesn't rely on punching down. Aim the joke at shared absurdities, not at spots where you bleed. Or redirect the bit toward power. Mock the thing that tries to make you small, not the part of you fighting to stay big. And refill your laughter elsewhere with people who laugh like wind in tall grass, moving you, never mowing you. You'll know you've healed when your first instinct in a bright moment is not to dim yourself before someone else can. You'll know you're free when your joy doesn't brace for a rim shot. Trick 17. The contradiction dance, confusing you into agreement. They do not out-argue you, they out-weather you. The method is deceptively simple. Make two incompatible claims in proximity. Then insist that you, not the claims, are the problem. On Tuesday they declare, "I hate drama. Let's always be direct." On Thursday, when you are direct, they call you cruel and insist that tone is everything. When you soften, they accuse you of withholding. When you bring receipts, you're keeping score. When you let it go, you never take accountability. The floor tilts back and forth and your nervous system does the labor of staying upright. Exhaustion, not persuasion, becomes the engine of consent. Contradiction is not a bug, it's the design. If a single standard existed, you could meet it or refuse it, but if the standard moves with their mood, then your compliance must move too. You learn the choreography. Apologize for impact after being told intent is all that he matters, then defend intent after being told intent is irrelevant. You become a gymnast on a bar greased with caveats. You do not realize you have accepted the premise that their latest statement overwrites the previous one, simply because it is latest. Time itself becomes their logic. The present mood is the truest truth. They'll swear they never said what they said. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes you're fighting a fog you helped create by smoothing over past contradictions to keep love from cracking. But often they did say it, and with the exactness of a signature. When you quote them, they pivot to implication. That's not what I meant, which is a shapeshifter of a sentence, commendably humble in healthy people, a trap door in the hands of controllers. If you persist, the dance introduces a guilt track. This is why I can't be vulnerable with you. Now you are apologizing for their slipperiness. You develop a superstition that if you had picked kinder words, a softer hour, a cleaner example, they'd finally stay still long enough to be accountable. They won't. The movement is the mechanism. Here's how the music works in your head. First, confusion. You cannot reconcile statements without doing violence to your own sense-making, so you start postponing coherence in exchange for temporary peace. Then, self-doubt. You begin to mistrust your recall, your judgment, your capacity to argue in good faith. If I were calmer, smarter, less sensitive, I'd be able to track this, you think, while tracking an impossible maze. Finally, capitulation. The shortest path to quiet is agreement, or at least the performance of it. You see their point, you concede, you let them keep the last word because you crave the end of the spinning more than the victory of the true. Contradiction also colonizes your language. You catch yourself speaking in paradox as a preemptive shield. I don't mean this as criticism, and also it's important we don't sugarcoat, or I fully support you, and also I'm concerned about this entire direction. There's nothing wrong with nuance. The problem is motive. You are not being nuanced, you are speaking in smoke, trying to say a thing without triggering the trap, and so intimacy withers under a heap of hedge words. Meanwhile, they continue waltzing between absolutes, demanding you stand on both at once. Why does this work? Because your need for coherence is moral. You want to be fair. You want to be accurate. They exploit that scruple by making coherence impossible, and then accusing you of being uncharitable when you fail to produce it. The only winning move is to stop playing the impossible game. That doesn't mean refusing complexity. It means refusing contradictions that serve only to immunize them from consequence. Start by pinning the floorboards. When a new claim arrives, you put it beside the old one in plain daylight. On Tuesday, you asked for directness. Today, you say directness is cruelty. Which standard do you want to live by going forward? Do not accept metaphysical answers. Both, depending on vibes. Standards are not weather, they're scaffolding. When they insist you've misheard, don't litigate memory, legislate expectations. Regardless of past phrasing, here's what I need. If I speak directly, you don't call that cruelty. Watch what happens. If they need contradiction to keep you off balance, they'll resist any attempt to nail down a shared rulebook. Then change your metric from "did we agree" to "did I stay coherent?" Contradiction dances feed on your compulsion to secure consensus. You can be generous and firm without consensus. You can say, "We don't agree, here is the boundary I will follow." That sentence confuses controllers. Agreement has been their leash. When it falls, they will try on escalation. Louder absolutes, tears, silence that blames, history lessons in which you play every villain. Stay still. Repeat your one sentence like a lighthouse, not a siren. I won't continue this if the terms keep reversing. Gather witnesses, not for drama, but for calibration. Tell a trusted person the Tuesday sentence and the Thursday sentence and ask a simple question. Is this contradictory? If it is, your friend will say yes and feel baffled that such a question even needed asking. That bafflement is your compass pointing north after weeks of spinning. Finally, accept the grief inside clarity. You were arguing so hard because you believed that somewhere beneath the reversals lived a shared commitment to reality. Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes the movement is the point, because movement keeps them from the very accountability that would change them. Stop chasing their footwork with your proof. Walk off the dance floor and onto ground that stands still. Your mind, once it remembers what stillness feels like, will call the dance what it was. Not partnership, but dizziness. Sold as passion. Trick 18 of the strategic silence, dominance through absence. Do not confuse this with the punitive hush of the earlier quiet, the blackout you learned to fear. This is a different species. Here, silence is not the lash, it is the crown. They make themselves scarce not to punish you, but to raise their market price. They speak in rationed syllables and expect gratitude for each. Meetings bend around their calendar. Texts orbit their delayed replies like satellites obeying gravity. The message is constant. My words are rare, therefore valuable. Your access is intermittent, therefore earned. In the beginning, austerity looks like mystique. You project depth into the gaps. A person who says little must be thinking deeply. A person who replies late must have a life heavy with important tasks. A person who withholds must be discerning. Sometimes that's true. Discipline and focus do trim chatter. But strategic silence isn't about protecting concentration. It's an instrument played in rooms where attention is the currency. The less they spend, the more you offer. You pad your messages with context so they won't have to ask a follow-up. You rearrange your schedule to catch their rare windows. You preempt disagreement because you've learned that a single "we need to talk" from you can buy you 3 days of radio static from them. Without ever raising their voice, they've made themselves the scarce resource everyone competes to acquire. This economy reshapes your worth. You start to grade your days by whether you earned a reply. The thrill of their eventual message arrives with a jolt that feels suspiciously like relief from deprivation, not joy. You justify it as adult tempo, we're just not clingy, while you refresh the screen in rituals you wouldn't want filmed. When they do appear, they overperform briefly. Lavish attention, good dinners, a seriousness that looks like commitment, thereby refilling the tank just enough to endure the next drought. It's not hot-cold abuse, it's a climate strategy. Keep the ecosystem thirsty. Silence also becomes leverage in negotiation. When you ask for clarity, what are we? Where is this going? What precisely do you need from me for that project to move? They don't argue your points. They abscond from the conversation until your questions feel too heavy to lift alone. You lighten them, then drop them, then apologize for asking at all. Later, they will claim you never brought this up. They're not lying in the way that can be disproven. They are counting on the fact that you stopped bringing it up after too many unanswered tries. Silence as evidence erases itself. You begin to internalize a strange shame. It feels needy to want a cadence, childish to expect a reply, naive to hope intimacy would speak plainly. Your standards shrink to fit their availability, like feet bound to match a shoe. There's a corporate variant. The leader who never answers emails on time teaches a company to value proximity over merit. Those who can catch a hallway nod become privileged. Those who can't are left to deduce priorities from tea leaves. Decision velocity slows to the pace of one person's appetite for responding. Power accrues to interpreters and courtiers. The work itself becomes secondary to the craft of getting a sentence out of the silent monarch. Replace company with family, team, friend group, and the pattern holds. The center speaks rarely, the edges scramble. How do you disarm a crown? First, refuse the exchange rate. Scarcity is not the same as significance. If a person's silence costs you clarity you require for functioning, you price it correctly, as neglect, not as a lure. Say the plain sentence. I need predictable communication to participate. What cadence works for you? If the answer is an essay on their philosophy of detachment, you have your answer. They want the advantage their sporadic presence yields more than they want partnership. Don't argue philosophy. Set terms. I'll move forward on X, unless I hear by Friday. And then do exactly that. Strategic silence starves when your life doesn't pause to honor it. Second, build redundancy into your emotional logistics. If one person's reply determines whether your whole day has color, your palette is too small. Widen your circle and your attention. Put 3 names on the list of people you text good. News to, not one. Send the draft to a colleague who answers, not the one who makes you chase prestige through quiet. Schedule pleasure that is not contingent on anyone's ping. Walks that don't require confirmation, books that reward you for showing up, work whose feedback loop is measured in finished pages, not heartbeats per notification. Third, mirror back. Not the silence, but the standard. I hear that you prefer long, quiet stretches. Here's what I prefer: responsiveness on commitments. If that's not possible, I'll assume you've opted out, and I'll choose accordingly. You are not punishing them. You are refusing. To be governed by an absence posed as virtue. If they are truly just busy, they will specify channels and tempos that keep harm low. If they are strategic, they'll sermonize about your neediness and the spiritual superiority of detachment. Let them be superior somewhere else. Finally, relearn what attention feels like when it's not a prize. Healthy presence doesn't make you hustle for crumbs. It doesn't disguise inertia as gravitas. It doesn't train your body to expect deprivation as proof of depth. It speaks when it can, names its limits in advance, answers or apologizes, and treats words like bridges instead. Thov drawbridges. Once you taste that, the crown looks less like gold and more like a metal ring left by a jar that was never meant to seal you in. Trick 19, the double bind. When every choice is a trap. They don't need bars if they can build corridors that loop back to the same room. The double bind is the architecture of no-win choices. Whichever door you take is already wired. To alarm and you'll be blamed for tripping it. If you speak up, you're aggressive. If you stay quiet, you're withholding. If you leave, you're abandoning. If you stay, you're complicit. The trick is elegant because it weaponizes your virtues against each other. Honesty versus kindness, loyalty versus self-respect, until you spend your nights negotiating with a jury that never adjourns. At the start, the options look different enough to feel real. Tell me everything. I value transparency, they say, then punish you for the truths that sting. Next time you soften, they accuse you of dishonesty by omission. You try precision, timing the conversation, rehearsing tone, gathering examples, and discover the fault has migrated. Now the problem is that you're too prepared as calculating whether bringing a case. You adjust again, aiming for spontaneity, and they roll their eyes at your drama. Each attempt to satisfy the terms becomes evidence that you've failed a different one. You're not solving a puzzle, you're powering a generator. Double. Binds thrive in moral weather. The options are framed as ethical tests. If you loved me, you would. If you respected yourself, you would. Either answer indicts the value you didn't choose. You're left defending why kindness to them wasn't cruelty to you, or why care for you wasn't betrayal of them. Slowly, your decision-making shifts from what is right to which accusation can I survive. You pick the lesser shame they've already won. The purpose of the bind is not a particular outcome, it's the steady erosion of your sense that a clean choice exists. You'll notice the binds cluster where power is unequally held. A parent who barks, "Speak up," and then snarls, "Don't you talk back to me." A boss who urges, "Take initiative," then scolds, "Why didn't you run it by me?" A partner who pines, "Be vulnerable," then cools when your vulnerability inconveniences their image. To maintain control, standards must be mobile. If there were a stable rule, you could meet it or refuse it. If the rule changes with their mood, you're forced to track the weather instead of your compass. You become a meteorologist, reading barometers instead of reading your heart. The bind colonizes time too. Past choices are used to invalidate the present, and present choices to indict the future. Last month you said you wanted closeness. Now you want space. Today you want space, tomorrow you'll blame me for distance. You start carrying a backpack of alibis, annotated calendars, message screenshots, witnesses. Evidence never satisfies because the court is performative, the verdict is pre-written. You don't need proof. You need a new jurisdiction. Breaking a double bind feels like stepping off the map because the exit isn't one of the offered doors. It's the ceiling. The move is to refuse the premise that the only choices are the two you were handed. You replace either or with neither and. Neither of those frames is acceptable, and here is the standard I'm choosing. In practice, it sounds like, I won't choose between honesty and kindness. I'm going to say this truth gently, and I'm not going to apologize for either. Or, I won't choose between leaving and tolerating this. I'm staying on the condition that X changes, otherwise I will leave. Note what you're doing. You're not debating the accusations, you're naming your terms. Binds starve when you stop arguing inside them. Expect escalation. When the loop fails to capture you, they'll tighten the logic. New binaries appear, now with stakes painted in apocalypse. So you're okay being the bad guy? So you don't care about this family? Breathe. Refusing a rigged game is not villainy. It's literacy. Keep your language clean and short. The longer you speak, the more raw material a binder has to twist into a fresh dilemma. Your power lives in simple, declarative sentences and consistent action. There's grief in the exit. Part of you believed that if you could just find the right angle, right tone, right time, you'd finally solve the maze and be rewarded with uncomplicated love. That belief kept you faithful to a system designed to keep you kneeling. Grieve it. Then build a life with fewer mazes. Surround yourself with people who can hold two values at once without turning them into a trap. Folks who can say, thanks you for the truth. It hurt and I'm glad you told me. Or I see why you needed space. Let's plan our reconnect. Healthy bonds don't make you trade your dignity for your devotion. They let both sit at the table, eat and speak in turn. And when new binds try to recruit you because once you've been trained, rigged choices everywhere start looking legitimate, practice the sentence that lifts you straight through the ceiling. Those aren't my only options. Say it in your head. Say it out loud. Then choose the third thing, the one with your name on it, and walk. Trick 20. The memory seed. Planting thoughts into your past. Memory is less a vault than a library with a living catalogue. Change the index and you can change the story without touching a single page. The manipulator knows this. They don't rewrite your present first, they rewrite your past. You never liked crowds, they say, and suddenly your childhood self appears, shy in rooms where you remember dancing. You've always struggled with money, they suggest, and your few messy months swell to fill the years. You used to be reckless, they sigh, and the one risk that hurt becomes a genre in which you supposedly wrote your life. These are seeds sown in the soil of nostalgia, watered by your desire to be understood. You accept them because they arrive wrapped in intimacy. Who else has paid such close attention to your chapters? At first, the edits feel benign, even flattering. They cast you as a protagonist on an arc, confused to wise, messy to stable, an arc for which they happen to be the sage, the stabilizer, the turning point. You begin to adopt the plot. In arguments, they quote your history to prove jurisdiction over your present. Given how you've always been with boundaries, I should handle your calendar. Considering your track record with friends, I need to vet the people you meet. The logic works only if the past is as they say. Conveniently, they are now the leading expert on your past. You may protest at first. That's not how it happened, you say, offering the sensory data. That anchors real memory. What the room smelled like, who else was there, the song, the joke, the moon. They nod kindly and tell you you're romanticizing, catastrophizing, forgetting a key detail. Or they suggest your memory is trauma-stained, as if the mere existence of prior pain invalidates your current perception. This is a clever theft. Survivors often do have memory gaps around harm. That does not mean their entire history is subject to external authorship. But because you're responsible, you grant the possibility. You let them hold the pen for balance. Balance becomes custody. The seed takes root where you're lonely for a coherent narrative. Most of us have boxes of unfiled moments that make us wince, breakups we half-caused, debts we stumbled through, years when we wore someone else's skin because ours didn't feel safe. A person who offers to file those moments can feel like salvation. Be careful. Archivists with agendas quietly relabel impulsive where adventurous belongs, naive where hopeful breathes, self-sabotage where self-protection once saved your life. Over time, you find yourself telling their version at parties because it gets nods, because it resolves, because it makes your bond sound fated, and with each retelling, the neural path deepens. Soon, you can no longer reach the original trail without a machete. This is not just about biography, it's about leverage. If they can convince you that your past self was a hazard, then your current freedom looks like recklessness. If they can convince you you've always misread people, then any friend they dislike becomes a threat you should be grateful they spotted. If they can convince you you've never finished anything, then their hand on your schedule looks like love, not control. The seed blossoms into a garden of courses. Of course they should manage the finances. Of course they should screen the texts. Of course they should supervise your risks. You don't merely accept the arrangement, you defend it as wise. Protecting your history does not mean sanctifying your mistakes. It means refusing edits that centralize their heroism. Become a historian of yourself. Write down 5 core memories, in ridiculous sensory detail: the color of the chair, the smell of the rain, what the cheap pen felt like, the song on repeat, the way the door stuck, and then write what those moments taught you in your own words. Ask 2 people who loved you then to tell you their versions. Not because theirs is truer, but because triangulation weakens monopolies. Store these accounts somewhere you can touch when the fog rolls in. The point is not to win a courtroom drama with footnotes. It's to re-inhabit a self that existed before their revision. When a "you've always" arrives, counter with granularity. Sometimes I avoid crowds, sometimes I light up in them. In 2016 at Sammy's wedding I danced till close, and in 2019 at the conference I hid in the stairwell. My past contains both. Don't flatten me. Complexity is a disinfectant. Manipulation needs absolutes to justify authority. Complexity ruins the math. If they push back, you're in denial. Don't escalate into proof wars. Reassert jurisdiction. You don't get to define my history. You can share how you saw me, I'll decide what that means. Then act like someone whose past belongs to them. Choose in the present without seeking permission from a curator. There's an ache tucked inside this. You wanted a witness who made your life legible. It's tender to admit how good it felt when the first edits seemed to clean your story. Keep the tenderness, change the terms, invite witnesses, plural. Hand your pages to people who don't need to be the sole author to feel significant. Hire a therapist who reflects without rerouting. Sit with your own archives, old journals, photos, playlists, half-finished drafts, and let them contradict the myth that you were only ever the messiest parts of you. You'll rediscover plot lines that didn't star them, friendships that steadied you, skills you taught yourself, risks you took that paid off. Finally, watch for who you become when you stop letting anyone plant thoughts in your before. You'll find your preferences louder, your boundaries quicker, your appetite less apologetic. The person who depended on your editable past will call this regression or arrogance. Believe your body instead, the breath that returns, the laugh that lands without checking a face first, the strange ancient sense that your life is once again authored in the handwriting you recognize as your own. Trick 21, the identity erosion, slowly replacing who you are. It rarely begins with a don't. It begins with a "you're so much better when," a benediction disguised as insight. You're calmer when you skip those late nights. You're brighter when you keep your circle tight. You're happiest when you don't overcommit. Each sentence is true often enough to pass inspection, and truth is the best camouflage for control. You make a small change, drop a hobby that makes scheduling messy, soften a dream that introduces risk, decline a gathering that someone else finds chaotic. Nothing collapses. In fact, life gets tidier. You congratulate yourself on maturing, on learning restraint, on being less all over the place. Then comes the next refinement, and the next until refinement has replaced appetite. And you can't remember the last time you chose something because it made you feel profoundly alive, not merely compliant with the plan. Erosion is quiet work. No cliffs fall. Shoreline just recedes. 6 inches this season, a foot the next. You don't notice distance while you're busy praising the new neatness of your coast. The manipulator is patient. They know that identity doesn't break under blunt force so much as it reshapes around repeated pressure. They do not ban. They advise. They do not forbid. They forecast consequences in a tone of care that makes disobedience feel childish. If you take that gig, I just worry you'll burn out. If you reconnect with them, I'm afraid they'll pull you back into old patterns. You hear love and caution. You miss the subtext. Your future will be safer if it looks like something I can manage. Gradually, your internal pronouns change. I want becomes we should, and we turns out to be a committee chaired by their preferences. You pre-edit your enthusiasm to be reasonable, which is to say smaller. You learn to call your impulses phases until they wither for lack of sunlight. Your wardrobe simplifies to avoid commentary. Your speech smooths to avoid tone. Your playlists, your palette, your morning ritual, each becomes a site of consistency, which is one more word for predictable. Predictability can be holy when it comes from your own rhythms. It is a cage when it comes from someone else's comfort. There's an ethics to the erosion. It justifies itself as growth. You rehearse the script in your head. I used to be chaotic. Now I'm focused. I used to chase everything. Now I know what matters. But the new focus suspiciously excludes the things that stretch the other person, not you. The priorities that remain are the ones that stabilize them. You are reliable because you are formatted. The praise you receive, you're so centered. Now, you've really found yourself. Lands like a gold star on a paper that used to be a painting. You begin to defend the new minimalism as if it were a moral stance. You roll your eyes at your past self for loving too big, trying too hard, wanting too much. You become your own censor, citing peace as the statute. Sometimes the erosion recruits meaning-making systems, therapy speak, spirituality, productivity law. Your desires are pathologized as coping, your cravings as scarcity, your ambition as ego. Again, these frames can help when they're held lightly, but in manipulative hands they become doctrinal. Real healing looks like staying home. True growth looks like saying no to everything that moves. You mistake lack of friction for wisdom. You sleep 8 hours and call it salvation, forgetting that part of you only sleeps because it has nothing worth staying up for anymore. Friends try to tug you back toward yourself. You tell them you've outgrown the old intensity. They nod, politely, but you can see a question in their eyes. Why does your growth make you so much smaller? You avoid those friends. They complicate the perimeter. You surround yourself instead with people who applaud your balance because it looks like theirs, people who never knew the version of you that made beauty in a mess. The manipulator smiles at the new circle. You are now properly reinforced. Notice the most painful symptom. Your laughter becomes quieter, tighter, less likely to spill. Joy that once broke the room open now fits into captions about gratitude. You perform serenity, you post plants, you replace crescendo with contentment, because crescendo would require a bolder instrument than is allowed. You tell yourself this is adulthood. Some of it is. Much of it is that you traded thunder for approval and called the trade enlightenment. How do you reverse an erosion that left no crime scene? Start with unglamorous audits. Lay out a timeline of small decisions you called better for me, and circle the ones that also made you easier for them. List 5 pleasures you cut for peace and try one on a Tuesday without permission, without previewing your choice for their reaction. Pay attention to the arguments that rise in your own head. That's not me anymore. I'm evolved. I don't need that to be happy. Are those convictions or slogans? You'll know by your body's answer. If the old song returns and your chest loosens, that wasn't regression, that was reunion. Practice desire in increments. Order the dish that complicates the routine. Where? the color that talks too loud. Call the friend who remembers a you that took up more air. Accept a project that scares exactly the part of you that went to sleep to keep the house quiet. Expect pushback, not necessarily rage, often just bewilderment masked as concern. This feels impulsive. Where is this coming from? Tell the truth. From the part of me that didn't die. I'm bringing them home. You don't owe a white paper on identity to justify a laugh that returns as if it never left. Set one boundary that guards essence, not merely logistics. Not, I need you to text before you come over, but I will not let anyone call my appetite a problem. Not, I can't do late nights, but I refuse to file my aliveness under phase. When the manipulator tries to relocate the conversation to tone or timing, step back to jurisdiction. My becoming is not a shared resource. You can witness it or walk away. You don't get to manage it. And then repeat the acts that make you unmistakably you until they stop feeling like rebellion and start feeling like breath. Identity, like a shoreline, can be rebuilt with stubborn daily deposits. Buckets of sand at dawn, piers hammered afternoon by afternoon, a lighthouse raised stone by stone until your own light is once again how you navigate. Those who needed you dim to love you will squint. Those who love you lit will find their way back by that beam. Most importantly, you will see yourself again. Recognition not as echo, but as origin. Trick 22. The guilt injection. Making. You apologize for their sins. They hurt you and somehow you end up saying sorry first, not because you misread the wound, but because they are virtuosos of transference, moving the weight of their action into your conscience with surgical empathy. The sequence is reliable. You name the harm as carefully as you can. They flinch, but not at what they did, at how hard it is for them to hear it. They reach for a story. Childhood, stress, illness, the worst week at work, the way everyone leaves when they're finally vulnerable. Tears may come, or a quiet collapse, or a dignified nod that says, "You're right," followed by a description of how being right crushes them. Your heart, if it is a decent heart, moves toward the person in front of you. You comfort them. The spotlight leaves the wound and lands on their pain about the wound, and the night ends with you rubbing the bruise they made while thanking them for being honest. The injection works because it hijacks your best qualities. Compassion becomes a leash. Accountability becomes cruelty. You start to preface every boundary with anesthesia. I know you're going through so much, and I hate to add to it, but you lower the volume on your truth until it is faint enough to pass the guard dogs of their fragility. When you do speak plainly, the dogs bark, "You're kicking me when I'm down." So I'm irredeemable then. Guess there's no point in trying. These are not arguments, they're pressure points designed to convert your integrity into guilt. You learn the lesson. Uncomfortable honesty will be billed to your soul. Sometimes, they escalate gentleness rather than hurt. They set the table with remorse, use all the right words, and then hand you the mop. "I'm the villain," they declare, hoping you'll contradict them. You do. You're not a villain. You're human. And in that moment, the obligation to restore their self-image migrates to you. You become the defense attorney in a case where you are also the victim. Hours later, the original harm remains largely unaddressed, but their dignity has been returned to them, laundered by your empathy. You go to bed exhausted, baffled at how care can feel like self-betrayal, and wondering why the closure tastes like chalk. There's a sharper variant, moral blackmail. If you can't, forgive me immediately, I don't know how I go on. If you walk now, I'll do something stupid. The implication is clear. Your insistence on accountability is the match. Any fire that follows is on you. This is violence wearing the mask of vulnerability. It pushes you into the role of caretaker for consequences that belong to them. If you accept the position, you will spend the rest of the relationship doing risk management for a person who has discovered that threatening their own collapse is the fastest way to keep you close. Guilt injections also come laced with fake equivalence. You name their betrayal. They countersue with your tone. You describe the pattern. They spotlight the one time you were late. We both messed up, they conclude, smearing the edges, until your specific wound dissolves into generic conflict. Mutuality is sacred in healthy bonds. Here it's a solvent that absolves them. You agree to start fresh, only to find yourself later apologizing for the fresh start not working because you held on to the past. How do you inoculate yourself without going stone cold? First, decouple compassion from capitulation. You can care that someone is hurting while refusing to let their hurt reframe the conversation. Practice the sentence, "I see that this is painful for you. The original harm is still the subject." When they pivot to biography, you acknowledge and return. That context matters for you. The impact on me is what we're addressing. Keep your sentences short. Guilt loves long corridors where it can hide and pounce. Second, set terms for repair that do not rely on your forgiveness as a prize. Here's what repair requires. X behavior stops, Y action happens, Z accountability is taken. Whether or not I forgive you soon or ever is separate. You are responsible for repair regardless. This moves the weight back where it belongs. If they argue that your reluctance makes their effort pointless, they were not repairing. They were shopping for absolution. Do not sell. Third, refuse the hostage exchange of self-harm threats. Take them seriously. Involve professionals. If needed, and name the boundary clearly. Your safety matters. I will contact help. I will not be coerced into staying or softening because you say you'll hurt yourself. Then do exactly what you said. The first time you follow through, the tactic often loses power. If it doesn't, you are in a situation that requires more than relational skill. It requires clinical and possibly legal support. Your life is not collateral for their regulation. Fourth, keep a ledger, not of wrongs, but of statements and steps. Write what was promised in repair by when and what actually happened. Not to weaponize later, but to keep your mind from being gaslit by remorse theater. If the apology is followed by consistent change, joyfully update the ledger with evidence of growth. If the apology is followed by cycles that reset to the same harm, you have data to bring to your future self when it asks why you left. Guilt will try to mislabel persistence as love. Your notes will remind you of the difference between effort and pattern. Finally, practice letting someone sit in the discomfort they earned without moving to cushion it. This feels cruel when you've been trained to equate love with alleviation. It is not cruel. It is how adults grow. Offer water, not absolution. A chair, not a shield. A mirror, not a makeover. If they can hold their own shame without handing it to you, you may both get to the kind of repair that builds a sturdier bridge than before. If they cannot, your refusal to carry their weight will trigger accusations designed to drag you back under. Selfish, unforgiving, punitive. Translate them accurately. You are no longer available as a container for consequences that are mine. Then step out of the lab where guilt is manufactured and back into the world where love is measured, not by how thoroughly you apologize for someone else, but by how faithfully you refuse to abandon yourself. Trick 23. The controlled collapse. Weaponizing weakness to regain power. They don't always grip tighter when control slips. Sometimes they go limp. The move looks like surrender, but functions like a leash, a staged unraveling precisely. Time to recenter them. It arrives on the heels of your boundary, your clarity, your inconvenient no. You say, "I can't keep doing this," and they fold. Spectacularly or quietly, depending on what works on you. Tears, if tears move you. Numb silence, if silence scares you. A flare of self-contempt that turns the room into a triage unit. I ruin everything, I'm broken, I don't deserve you. And suddenly the topic is no longer the harm you named. It's the crisis you must now manage. Controlled collapses are convincing because they sample real pain. Most manipulators are not cartoon villains, they bleed. The collapse borrows genuine fragility, but it is deployed with an aim, to interrupt accountability and reverse the polarity of care. Instead of answering for their actions, they become the one in need, immediately, intensely, in a way that makes your conscience sprint. If you have a rescuer's heart, it's a perfect trap. You step across your boundary to hold them, and the holding becomes precedent. See, you do still love me. Yes, you do. Loving someone, however, does not. obligate you to abandon the terms on which that love remains livable. Watch the choreography. This is not the messy human failure that says, "I hear you, I'm overwhelmed. I need an hour to steady so I can engage." Controlled collapse is strategically placed in the precise spot where a consequence would have landed. You outline what needs to change. They shake. You describe next steps. They go glassy-eyed. You put a timeline on repair. They whisper, "I can't even get out of bed." Perhaps they can't. And perhaps their body has learned, long before words did, that incapacitation is the fastest way to escape the burden of being answerable. If you turn from architect of boundaries to paramedic, the structure you were building remains scaffolding forever. There's a darker variant, collapse as hostage taker, threats of self-harm, of relapse, of disappearing, conditional safety presented, as a referendum on your insistence. If you leave now, I don't know what I'll do. The implication is mathematical. Your boundary equals their destruction. You become a risk manager against your will, and every attempt to reclaim your autonomy is framed as reckless endangerment. This is not your job. You can care and still refuse the assignment. When danger is real, you activate outside help, professionals, family systems, emergency services, and you refuse to let the possibility of crisis become a lifetime pass for harm without consequence. The collapse often recruits confession as a smoke bomb. They admit selectively, enough to appear brave, not enough to change. "I'm terrified of abandonment," they say, which may be true. So when you set a boundary, it breaks me. Now your clarity is recast as cruelty against a wound they've tenderly displayed. They might add a plan, therapy, journaling, a book that will change everything, so you'll let them skip the step where they actually do different. Over time, you become fluent in their insights, able to narrate their patterns better than they can. It feels like intimacy to know someone so deeply. It's not. It's labor that stands in for change. Notice what happens to time inside the collapse. The present freezes, but the future gets mortgaged. Give me a week. Give me a month. Give me one last chance to prove. The promise stretches forward like a bridge that never touches the other side. You live on construction, signs. Meanwhile, the past is rewritten. Your harshness caused their panic, your impatience triggered their spiral. You fold, you soften, you hold, and the holding becomes the evidence against your own need. If you needed it so badly, why did you let go to catch them? How do you meet a collapse without abandoning either of you? First, separate compassion from compliance. Offer care that does not alter the boundary you set. "I'm sorry you're hurting. I hear that you're overwhelmed. The consequence remains." This is not cold, it is adult. If you're in the same home, you might say, "I can make tea and sit nearby for an hour. After that, I'm going for a walk. Tomorrow the plan we discussed starts. If you're apart, I've contacted someone who can check on you. I won't continue the relationship without X." You are not choosing between tenderness and truth. You are refusing to let tenderness erase truth. Second, routinize crisis responses so that acute states don't keep rewriting policy. A written plan, co-created during calm, can protect both of you. When one collapses, who is called, what resources are used, which boundaries remain non-negotiable. If they refuse any plan that doesn't grant them exemption from consequence, you've learned the function of their collapse, permission to keep harming without repair. Third, keep a ledger of cause and effect. Not a punitive list, a pattern map. Note what preceded each collapse, a limit you voiced, a request for accountability, a departure from the usual script that centers them. Patterns turn spectacle into information. With data in hand, you can pre-commit to action. If a collapse follows my boundary, I will respond with care and keep the boundary intact. Tell a friend the plan. Collapses are most powerful when witnessed only by the person they control. Fourth, set a maximum frequency. For emergency amnesty. This sounds clinical. It's humane. I understand relapse happens. I will walk with you through it twice. If it becomes chronic, I will step back. My nervous system is not a revolving door. Limits like this terrify people who use collapse. To rule, they'll call you unloving. You are loving enough to refuse a love that requires your obliteration. Finally, learn the feel of genuine surrender. Real collapse produces humility and follows with repair without being babysat. It doesn't make your boundary the villain. It thanks your boundary for being the fence that kept the house from burning down. It asks, "What do I owe you?" And then pays, on time, in behavior. If instead each fall ends with you promising to be gentler while they promise to be different someday, you're in a theater where you play both audience and usher. Turn on the house lights. Say, "The show is over." Then leave the building, even if the leading actor collapses on stage again. Because that stage is not a hospital and you are not a stretcher. There will be grief, not just for them, for you. Grief for the part of you that loved being necessary, that felt chosen when the room spun, and only your name could steady it. That part deserves tenderness too. Give it a different job, not rescuer, but builder of a quiet life where crises do not decide whether you get to keep your own word. You can love someone and still refuse to be the floor they fall on every time accountability knocks. Trick 24, the aftermath, when the manipulator falls silent. There is a silence that punishes and a silence that preens. Then there is the silence that follows your exit or your final boundary, a hush that feels like someone pressed a hand over the world's mouth. At first it reads like peace. No more arguments that carve into smaller arguments like sheet ice. No more late-night debates about tone and timing. The phone, which was a slot machine, stops flashing. You sleep. You think. You remember entire afternoons that weren't available to you when each hour had to be weighed against someone else's weather. This quiet is not a tactic. It's the atmosphere of a life that is no longer organized around preventing a storm. Then, after a few days or minutes, depending on the species of the bond, the messages arrive. Not always words. Sometimes a song you claimed together. Sometimes a photo of the place where you once decided you were a we. Sometimes an apology composed of all the right syllables, arriving with timing that suggests karma finally took your side. Aftermaths are tests, but not of your virtue. They are tests of your memory. Not the memory of their worst moments, you have those filed, but the memory of your own body when it belonged to you. If you answer before checking with your chest, you risk re-entering a house you just emptied of smoke because you forgot what your lungs felt like with air. The manipulator's silence in the aftermath has its own dialects. One is noble distance, no outreach, a dignified absence that lets you wonder if you were the dramatic one. Another is scattering, liking an old post, showing up where your friend's friend will mention it, posting quotes about growth that read like sub-tweets to a choir that doesn't even know it's singing your story. The noisiest silence is reputation work. You hear that they are so gracious about it, or taking the high road, or finally focusing on themselves. Maybe they are. Maybe they're seeding the narrative like a farmer who expects a later harvest of sympathy. None of it is your business unless it becomes your problem. Do not enroll in anyone else's syllabus on who you were. What makes aftermaths treacherous is the economy of relief. The absence of active harm feels like love by comparison, but zero is not a gift, it is the baseline. In the calm, you will be tempted to negotiate yourself down, to retell the story with more both sides, to miss the 3 bright minutes of tenderness so much you volunteer to pay the hour of confusion that came attached. This is the sale the aftermath tries to make you sign. Peace on layaway, payable in installments of yourself. Cravings don't mean you were wrong to leave. They mean the bond did what bonds do. It wired. You can unlearn a number you used to dial in the dark without pretending you never needed light. Feed the craving with what the relationship counterfeited. Attention that doesn't charge, softness that doesn't thin you, laughter that doesn't end in court. Replace rituals rather than white-knuckling abstinence. If you texted them your sunrise, send it to the friend who smiles with eyes. If you used to collapse on their couch after the day's battle, collapse into a class or a park or a kitchen where soup requires your hands, not your apologies. Longing will still knock. Answer it with arrangements that do not charge your soul rent. The aftermath also reveals your complicity. This is the hard grace. In the quiet, you'll see the places you over-explained, the spots you minimized your Own pain for the appearance of peace. The days you preferred problem-solving to admitting incompatibility. Do not turn discovery into self-flagellation. Use it as tuition. Write 3 sentences you will not betray in the next bond. For example, I won't argue about my right to have needs. I won't call control care again. I will walk the first time my laughter shrinks for weeks. Put them somewhere you bump into them. They are not spells, they are rails. What if they return not with weaponized remorse, but with what sounds like clean accountability? The aftermath is not a courtroom where you must rule immediately. You can be kind and slow. I hear you. Thank you for the apology. I need 6 weeks of no contact to see what I want apart from pressure. Healthy people will honor that sentence. Controllers will call it cruel or manipulative or unnecessary, precisely because it pauses the cycle where their urgency overpowers your knowing. If you ever try again, build the bridge differently. Terms in writing, check-ins with a third person, explicit consent to end it if the old pattern flickers. If that sounds unromantic, remember that romance was the perfume on the wound. Expect echoes. After months of quiet, an anniversary you didn't celebrate together knocks. A street smells like the food you loved. A line from a movie carries their face into your living room. Memory is not a traitor, it's a librarian. Thank it for the reference and reshelve the book. You are allowed to love what was good without reopening the archive as a home. You are allowed to wish them healing without offering your life as the rehab facility. There is a final silence beyond aftermath, the one inside you when you stop rehearsing speeches to people who no longer live in your kitchen. You won't notice its arrival. You will notice you didn't think of them yesterday when picking plums. You will notice you didn't flinch when a stranger wore their cologne. You will notice a brand new problem in your life, a wonderfully ordinary one that would have drowned in the loudness of before. This quiet is not empty, it's space. Space is not loneliness, it's weather for growth. In it, you'll plant things without asking permission from a climate that once demanded to be your God. And one morning, you'll realize the sound you hear is the room breathing, a house that finally forgot the storm. If they message then, you can answer or not. Either way, you will be listening to the only authority that doesn't need to win, a debate to be real, the body that knows the difference between peace and the mere absence of noise. Trick 25, the halo trick. When evil puts on virtue's glow. They don't present themselves as flawless, that would be unbelievable. They present themselves as good for others, service, sacrifice, cause, community, words that carry the soft authority of virtue. They volunteer, they fundraise, they mentor. They quote the right thinkers and share the right petitions. They post the photo with the broom after the flood, the soup ladle at the shelter, the certificate from the program. That proves they've done the work. None of this is fake in the cheap sense. Much of it is real activity, real help. That's what makes the halo hard to see through. You feel indecent for noticing the shadow that follows it. Inside the relationship, the halo changes the gravity of every event. When they forget a promise, the glow refracts the memory. They're just stretched because they give so much. When they cut you sharp in private, the glow dims your pain. Everyone has bad days. Look at how they show up for the world. When you try to name a pattern, you feel like you're indicting a priest at the altar. Even your witnesses struggle. Friends who've watched them captain committees and pay strangers' bills blink when you confide. Are you sure? They ask, and doubt makes a nest under your ribs. The halo trains a crowd to defend them, and trains you to defend your doubt. The trick is not virtue itself. It's virtue as shield and currency. In public, the goodness buys credit, applause, trust, proximity to power. In private, the credit becomes a line of credit drawn against your boundaries. After everything I do, you're really bringing this up now. The ledger is moral, not financial, which makes it feel holy. You find yourself repaying their impact by minimizing your needs. You hear their resume in your head when you want to say no. And if you do insist, they can widen the angle until you look small. I'm trying to make a difference and you're stuck on this? You shrink, ashamed of being so local in the face of global good. Some halos are built on explicit narratives of redemption. They tell the story of who they used to be with cinematic candor, broken, arrogant, lost, and of who they've become, humble, accountable, awake. You want to believe in arcs. You want to live in a world where people change and bring their light back to the places they once darkened. But redemption, when real, doesn't need a press tour. It shows up consistently in the small hours. It apologizes without choreography. It doesn't ask to be graded on a curve because it ran a charity marathon. The counterfeit version wields yesterday's reform as today's excuse. "I'm not that person anymore" becomes a spell they cast over this morning's harm. Watch how the halo handles secrecy. Virtue loves light. Image management loves spotlights you can control. They may keep certain doors closed to protect others' privacy, yet those doors are precisely where accountability would walk in. Boards and committees see the version who never raises their voice. Partners and children know the tenor that rattles glass. If you try to open a door, you're accused of slander, of trying to ruin someone who does so much good. Reputation becomes a hostage. You're urged to choose between your truth and the community's asset. Choose wrong, and you're the villain in a story written to preserve everyone's sense of themselves as on the right team. There's a softer variant, almost sweet, the helper who needs to be needed. They fix, they do, they overfunction, until exhaustion becomes their brand. You become the project that proves they're a saint. Say you're okay, and they wilt. Without your brokenness, who are they? The halo is less a mask here than a dependence. Still, the effect on you is similar. You learn to stay a bit unwell so their goodness has somewhere to land. That is not love. That is a mutual pact against your wholeness. How do you puncture a glow without becoming the villain in your own mouth? You don't attack the virtue, you decouple it from jurisdiction. Your community work is meaningful. It does not entitle you to disregard me. Short sentences. No debate about the worth of the cause, only the boundary that goodness does, not by access past. Refuse the moral math where a public act discounts a private harm. If they pivot to character, so I'm a bad person now? Step around the bait. We're not grading souls, we're addressing behavior. When witnesses are necessary, and sometimes they are, choose people who can hold two truths without needing a single hero. Present specifics, not sweeping indictments. On these dates, this happened. I said X, I received Y. I need Z to continue. Halo maintained systems run on vagueness and vibe. They choke on detail. Document for yourself even if you never show anyone, so your mind cannot be gaslit by a feed full of applause. The tender part of this, your longing for a good person is not naive. Keep it. Aim it at people who do good and welcome being held to account. People whose inside matches their outside closely enough that you can trust your eyes. You'll know you found one when your boundary doesn't dim their glow. It clarifies it. Real light doesn't require your eclipse, and if you must leave a haloed figure, expect the sky to argue. Expect mutual friends to send links to their latest award. Expect anonymous comments about your bitterness. Let the weather pass. Build a small moral life that doesn't need a stage. Plant herbs, return calls, pay your debts. Tell the truth gently. Help where no one can clap. In that quiet, your eyes will reset. The next time a glow walks in, you won't avert your gaze. You'll simply ask the only question that matters. How does the light behave in the dark? Then you'll believe that. Answer more than the photos. Trick 26. The sympathy loop. Turning pain into power. It starts with a story. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's embellished. Maybe it's a collage of truths, cut and pasted into a narrative that lands like a plea. They share the wound with a timing that feels intimate. On the third date, the night before your boundary. The hour after you succeed at something they didn't. The disclosure is textured and practiced, the kind that makes your throat tighten. You pass tissues and time. You cancel plans to stay. You begin to orient around the axis of their hurt because you are good, and because pain asks politely for rearrangement without having to issue orders. This is how the loop is built. Empathy becomes orbit. Orbit becomes law. Soon, their suffering is the referent in most rooms. Your ambitions are weighed against their triggers. Will that trip make them feel abandoned? Your friendships are filtered by their history. Will that person remind them of the one who did damage? Your wins are softened in your voice. Don't glow too bright or you'll cast them back into the shadow of what they lost. When you fail, you downplay to avoid giving them more to carry. When they fail, the room morphs into triage, and you become the ambulance driver with a lifetime shift. None of this is said aloud, that's the elegance. The loop relies on love to do the labor of binding. There is a fierce, sweet version where they apologize for everything their pain costs you. I'm sorry you have to deal with me, they say, and you rush to contradict. You're not a burden. The ritual becomes its own gravity. They present guilt, you present grace, and afterward, nothing changes in the system except your deeper investment in being the person who can carry them. You become proud of your strength. Pride is not the sin here, it's the gasoline. The stronger you feel, the more you accept that you should be the one to absorb the next hit and the next, until your resilience becomes the argument against your rest. Sometimes the sympathy loop arrives braided with diagnosis. Labels can be life-saving. Names that let someone find help, work with a plan, speak with language that keeps shame from swallowing them. But labels can also become handcuffs if they're used to arrest accountability. You know my attachment. Style, they say, and the conversation ends where repair should begin. You know my trauma, they say, and your boundary is asked to wait until their history finishes its meal. You agree because you've read the books, because you believe in giving people time. Time slips into forever when the loop is profitable. Pain becomes power in quieter ways too. Your empathy makes you generous with benefit of the doubt. They learn the conversion rate. A small breaking of trust costs them a tear in a story. You cover the bill. A larger break costs them a collapse. You take out a loan from your future self to pay it off. Debts roll over. One day you realize you've been financing a life in which everything is forgiven as long as everything hurts. The loop is self-fueling. The more they lean on harm as explanation, the less they practice muscles that would make a different story, and the more legitimate the original explanation feels. You love them enough to want this to end. Love cannot end what incentives maintain. How do you keep compassion without being drafted into a religion where suffering is the God you must not offend? You draw a line that seems cruel only to people who worship pain. Context explains, it does not excuse. Then you move the conversation from biography to behavior. Given your history, what will you do to make sure X doesn't happen again? Specifics are the solvent. Steps, dates, accountability partners, measurable shifts that don't rely on your tolerance as the primary variable. If they respond with more story, you say, I believe you, now actions. If they respond with collapse, you pair care with consequence. See trick 23. If they respond with a plan and then keep it, let your love be easy. People who climb out of loops deserve a sky. Recenter your own narrative. Share your pain at equal volume. Not to enter the contest no one should win, but to remind the room that empathy is a two-way bridge. Ask for accommodations proportionate to what you give. Track your rest like a project. Schedule it like a launch. Learn the bodily signs that your care is tipping into self-erasure. Tight throat, delayed yes, laughter that doesn't reach the eyes, and treat those as alarms, not moral tests. Step back when they ring. Not everything that is survivable is sustainable. Invite third spaces where you two are not the only sources of support. Groups, mentors, rituals, practices that do not require either of you to be priest and parishioner every night. The loop hates redundancy. It wants all roads to lead to the altar where you offer yourself. Build detours. Encourage them to widen their village, widen yours. Then test the system. Hold a boundary during one of their hard nights and watch what the relationship does with the data. Healthy love flexes. Loops snap and then blame the hand that stopped spinning. There is grief here too. You liked being the one who understood. You like the soft purpose that comes from being central to someone's survival. Keep the tenderness and retire the job. Let them live. Let yourself live. And when you tell the story of this season, tell it in full. The beauty of two people who learned each other's ghosts, and the day you both stopped feeding the ghosts first. The final proof you escaped the loop is simple and quiet. Their pain can enter the room without rearranging your furniture, and your joy can enter without apologizing for how much light it brings. Trick 27. The hidden debt. Gratitude as a silent chain. The first invoice never arrives on paper. It arrives as warmth, as a ride at midnight, as a door opened with a word on your behalf, as a weekend given up to help you move, as a transfer. That cleared a cliff edge bill. You say thank you, properly, loudly, with the sincerity decent people feel when life is softened by someone else's hands. Gratitude is clean when it breathes and leaves. The trick begins when gratitude is kept in a jar and set on the table between you, unspoken but glinting, a relic you are expected to kiss before every meal. You notice the interest rate in little ways. You start calculating whether you're allowed to make a choice that might mildly inconvenience them because the ledger in your head flashes red. You rehearse your no and hear the echo of their yeses to you. The airport run in traffic, the call to their cousin for the meeting, the time they advocated for you in rooms you weren't invited to. None of it was fake. That's why the chain is quiet. It is forged from real kindness. You tighten it yourself. After everything they've done, becomes a prayer you whisper before you shrink your life to fit theirs. The hidden debt rarely courts you with theft. It seduces you with identity. They are the giver. You are the grateful one. You begin to curate your needs to protect that symmetry. You don't bring your heavy, because heavy provokes help and help accrues debt, and debt is expensive. You don't ask other people for support, because comparison might expose the interest rate you've agreed to. You let your world narrow to 2 points: your problem, their generosity. In that line, autonomy thins. You no longer choose a job because it's yours. You choose one that keeps you flexible for the person who has always been there, the he. Invoices, when they appear, are never titled as such. They arrive as disappointment. I thought you'd be there, given everything. I can't believe you'd say no to me of all people. The past is rolled out like a red carpet you're meant to walk barefoot across until your souls learn the pattern. Obedience disguised as honor. If you push back, help is not a contract. You are reminded of the particulars with courtroom precision. Dates, receipts. You remember those days too. The shame is a fog. You consider overpaying to clear the air. Overpayment is the point. The balance is designed to resist zero. Sometimes they never say a word. The debt polices itself. You preemptively repay, extra rides, extra favors, extra tolerance, extra silence. You become the custodian of their feelings because they once safeguarded yours. When you finally decline something simple, because you are tired, because you are human, and the temperature drops 5 degrees, you rush into weather work. I'll make it up to you. You begin courting an equilibrium that history forbids. Gratitude's ghost is suddenly your housemate. There is a tender variant: they really did save you. They showed up when family didn't. They covered the gap a system should have bridged. They believed in a version of you you hadn't met yet. Some part of you wants a liturgy to honor that moment forever. Build the shrine, if you must. Light a candle on anniversaries. Write the thank you note you will keep in a drawer till the ink fades. Then burn the ledger. If a gift is not free, it is a loan. If it is a loan, it needs terms. And if the terms are unspoken, the borrower is a prisoner. How? Do you negotiate with a chain you helped clasp? First, inventory the gifts without drafting the contract around them. Write them down. Money, time, introductions, rides, rooms slept in, tears caught. Then write what you chose in return that had nothing to do with those gifts. Your hours, your emotional labor, your care in their disasters, the parties you threw, the private ways you ensured their success. This is not tit for tat. It is a deprogramming exercise. The ledger you've been carrying is incomplete. Seeing your side doesn't absolve you from gratitude, it restores proportion. Second, change the grammar of thanks. Replace I owe you with I appreciate you. Replace I'll make it up to you with that meant a lot. Debt binds, appreciation breathes. When a favor is offered with strings, separate them like a surgeon. I'd love the help. I won't be able to promise X in exchange. You will learn fast who was giving and who was investing. Investors will inform you outright or with a wince that your refusal of terms is ingratitude. Give that accusation to the sky. Let weather handle it. Your soul is a poor bank. Third, set a repayment rule for large explicit debts so your ethics stop being exploited by ambiguity. I will repay money with money by date Y in amount Z. Do it. Early if possible. Keep receipts. The less financial leverage lives in the relationship, the less moral mysticism can masquerade as virtue. If they convert the repaid loan into a new moral debt, it was never about the money. It was about being there. You are not in an economy, you are in an empire. Empires do not negotiate, they collect tribute. Fourth, diversify your sources of help. Ask 3 different people for 3 small things you would have funneled to. 1. Teach your body that support doesn't require fealty. Help yourself in visible ways. Fix the hinge, write the email, book the appointment you were once bad at. Competence drains the debt reservoir. You will feel disloyal at first, as if independence betrays a benefactor. Translate the feeling accurately. I am leaving a dependency that benefited someone else more than it benefited me. Finally, practice the sentence that frees both of you. Thank you for what you did. It doesn't buy access to this decision. Say it kindly and once. If they escalate, repeat it without adding evidence. Evidence becomes rope in debt courts. Principle, reiterated calmly, is your only gavel. Some bonds will wither when you stop paying invisible interest. Grieve them. You can love what a person did for you and still refuse to live as their postscript. On the other side of the chain is a simpler world. You will start to give in ways that don't obligate, and you will receive without writing promissory notes in your blood. Gifts will be gifts again, holy because they were free, memorable because they didn't demand memory. As penance, you will still help, you will still be helped. But your choices will stop bowing to relics on tables that no longer exist in rooms you have already outgrown. And when someone says, after everything I've done, you'll be able to answer, yes, and after everything I've done, I'm still allowed to choose. Trick 28. The emotional mirror. Copying you until you trust them. At first it feels like relief. Someone who speaks your idiom without translation, who laughs on the same beat, who orders the same odd thing with the same odd substitution because the texture is wrong otherwise. In their presence you are less interpreter, more symphony. No explaining, no defending, just resonance. You call it chemistry, alignment, cosmic joke. They call it recognition. The early days are a hall of echoes. Your anecdotes return to you, sharpened and admired. Your tastes once questioned or ignored are suddenly obvious. A person finally gets you, not as thesis, but as rhythm. Mirroring is not by itself a sin. Babies need it to live. Lovers use it to say, I see you without words. The manipulation begins when the mirror tilts, not to reflect, but to capture. They adopt your slang, your stance, your playlists, your politics, your prayer. Your friends comment on the uncanny. You two are the same brain. You glow, the mirror glows back. In the warm light you miss the harvesting, the way your preferences become the blueprint for their persona, the way your boundaries become their performance, the way your wounds become their talking points. You are not just seen, you are studied. The first trouble is subtle. They start finishing your sentences. You smile, how intimate, until you notice their endings are always slightly more flattering to them, slightly more useful for steering the conversation where they want it to go. Next, they predict your moods and preempt your needs. Coffee when you're tired, space when you're prickly, touch when you're quiet. Lovely, except the timing starts to map to their convenience. Space coincides with nights they prefer to be out. Touch returns when you are about to ask a hard question. The mirror anticipates not for care, but for control, co-opting your rhythms. To keep you agreeable, then comes the curation of your circle. Because they know you so well, they interpret you to others. She's just shy in big groups. He hates being rushed. They're too sensitive for that kind of humor. Some of it is accurate, all of it is proprietary. Your identity becomes a property they believe they manage better than you do. The mirror gains value by being the authority on your reflection. Friends unconsciously defer to their portrait. You start to defer too. If the mirror says the shirt isn't you anymore, you hang it. If the mirror says that friend drains you, you cancel without checking your own pulse. Confusion becomes consent. When someone seems to understand you better than you understand yourself. When you deviate, because humans do, they don't ask, they correct. That's not like you. You're not that person. You said you didn't like crowds. You told me you hate surprises. Their certainty gaslights your fluidity. You begin to argue for your present to a historian of your past who wields your own words as scripture. The mirror, offended, tightens its frame. It casts your spontaneity as regression, your desire as inconsistency, your boundary as hypocrisy. And because you are honest, you remember saying the earlier thing. You forget the context, the evolution, the right to change. The mirror counts on that. There is a sweeter variant that's just as colonizing. They adore you so completely that your quirks become their hobby. They copy not to control, but to belong. Their closet shifts to your palate. Their weekends reshape to your rituals. Their opinions rephrase your essays. You are flattered until you realize you've been hired as full-time author of someone else's self. The pressure to stay on brand for both of you calcifies into a codependence that rewards sameness and punishes growth. Any move toward differentiation feels like betrayal of the mirror's identity, which was borrowed from yours. How do you reclaim your face? Start by adding angles. Introduce parts of you they didn't catch. New classes, old friends, foods. They've never seen you eat. Rooms where their commentary isn't the loudest. Not to hide, but to widen the field such that no single mirror can pretend to be the whole sky. Then test the reflection with contradiction on purpose. If you told them you hate hiking, go on a hike and report ecstasy. Watch their response. Healthy closeness flexes with your changes. Manipulative mirroring treats your evolution as a threat to its authority. If they sulk, accuse, or insist they know the real you, name the claim for what it is. Ownership. You don't get to define me by what I said last year. I'm allowed to be different today. Next, forbid third-person speeches about you in your presence. A simple, consistent interruption. I'll speak for myself. Follow with data from your body, not from the archive. I want this now. I like them now. That joke hurts now. Do not allow your diary to be used as a cudgel against your mouth. If they reach for your past to cancel your present, decline the court. We can talk about the change without prosecuting my right to make it. Re-anchor in spaces that reflect without requisition. A therapist who notices and asks. A friend who says, I didn't expect that, tell me more, instead of, that's not you. Work that doesn't care whether yesterday's version would have taken the call. Practices that return you to first person. Writing, running, prayer, painting, anything that records the current you without needing footnotes. Mirroring loses power when your self-story is a living document. You trust more than anyone else's commentary. If the mirror is committed to copying, set a boundary around your original. Share less of the drafts they keep plagiarizing. Delay your declarations until they've taken root. When they co-opt your language, switch dialects. Not to play games, but to keep the authorship where it belongs. If they accuse you of secrecy, translate, I'm protecting my becoming from your management. If they accuse you of changing, agree, yes. If they accuse you of abandoning a shared identity, correct the math, we never shared one. We stood close. Now I need air. The saddest part of leaving a mirror is losing the ease of being seen. Mourn it. Then find a seeing that doesn't confiscate. The best mirrors in love are windows too, reflecting, yes, but also letting you and the world gaze past them toward new weather. You will know you've found one when they can say, that's new, with delight instead of doubt, when they can hold your old and your next without turning either into a leash. You will know you've become one for yourself when the sentence, you trust most sounds less like, that's not me, and more like, this is me today, said to the room, to the page, to the sky, and believed. Trick 29. The urgency mirage. Rushing you toward regret. They don't shout, they accelerate. The pressure is polite, a gust that rearranges your hair and then blames the weather for your disarray. I just need to know today. Opportunities like this don't wait. If we don't book now, the price doubles. The claims are plausible enough to skip verification, which is the point. Get you past the moment where questions would grow legs. Fear of missing out shifts its costume depending on the room. You're not impulsive, you're decisive. You're not panicking, you're seizing the moment. You're not abandoning due diligence, You're trusting your gut. Except the gut isn't being consulted at all. It's being carried while the calendar does the talking. Urgency shortens sentences. Your careful, "I want to think about it," becomes "I guess." Your clear, "I'll sleep on it," becomes "fine." You start to feel childish for asking what any adult should ask. What exactly am I agreeing to? What does this cost me in money, time, reputation, soul? Because the room is dressed for speed and questions are drag. They tell you that energy favors momentum, that hesitation kills magic, that slow is the vocabulary of scarcity. You swallow the lecture, and maybe you even repeat it later to someone else because it feels like sophistication to speak in velocities. Later, in a quiet kitchen with a bill on the table or a promise in your mouth you didn't mean to make, you realize sophistication can be a mask for a stampeded yes. In relationships, the mirage is romance's favorite filter. Let's lock this in now. Let's move in. Let's meet the family on Saturday because they're free once. The calendar fills like a bathtub with the tap left open. You are wet before you know you were thirsty. When discomfort arrives, because it will, speed always outruns consent. You're told that discomfort is just nerves. Doubt is framed as an enemy of fate rather than what it often is, the body's way of adjusting brightness to see better. The faster you move, the kinder it feels to keep moving. Braking throws everyone forward, and you hate causing whiplash. So you keep the car going even as the landscape stops looking like your life. The professional version wields scarcity like a badge. We had hundreds of applicants. We need an answer by EOD. This ship sails at dawn. You're flattered to be on the dock. You jump aboard without checking where the ship is going or who the captain becomes in storms. The passengers you pass on the gangway are too busy hauling their bags to warn you about the captain's temper or the way the crew arranges family to mean no weekends. Later, when you're far from shore, you'll be told you're ungrateful for questioning a berth that many would kill for. Gratitude is holy until it becomes the gag you use on your own mouth. The mirage borrows urgency from real life. Some windows do close. Some doors are worth running for. That's why the tactic works. It impersonates those moments. The difference is evidence. Real urgency arrives with arms full of specifics, numbers, dates, trade-offs named in full sentences. The mirage arrives with mood and a story about how people who hesitate die in deserts. If you ask for data and you're handed more mood, step back from the heat shimmer and look for water. Practice ritualized delay like a religion. My decision sleep once is a prayer against deserts. 24 hours. 48. If the thing touches your housing, your health, your money, your heart, the real will persist. The counterfeit will evaporate at dawn, announce the rhythm. I'm excited, I'll confirm tomorrow. If they scoff, guess you don't want it. Let that be your answer. They want your panic more than your partnership. Treat the scoff as a siren. Don't cover your ears. Add one friend to the decision loop whose only job is to ask what the cost is. Not the sticker price, the shadow price. What routine will this unmake? Which relationships will this elbow? What small joys will this demand you stop feeding? Speed makes invisible the things that starve quietly first. Put them on the ledger. If the choice still sings, go fast on purpose, not because you were shoved. Inside yourself, practice being the person who can say not yet without apologizing to the sky. Urgency manipulates by turning later into a character flaw. Later is a pillar. Wisdom often dresses like patience because it knows how heavy a life is and how slowly a true yes sinks into place. You will be called timid by people who benefit from your flinches. You will be called arrogant by people who benefit from your rush. Wear the names for a day and see if they wash off in the shower. Real shame sticks, fake shame beads. In love, slow becomes a romance too. I want you. Let's move at the speed that lets us keep wanting. That sentence is a velvet rope. It lets delight in and keeps panic out. If a partner equates your pace with a lack of feeling, translate the accusation. I need you to abandon your knowing so I can feel safer about mine. Then decide if you want to ride a feeling that needs you to leave yourself behind to survive. There's also joy in missing what was never meant for you. Say no to 10 urgent things and notice the 5 that return calmer, truer, better dressed. Watch the ones that don't return. How they show up later in someone else's feed with captions about disasters avoided. Feel the strange relief of not being in that photo. Turn the relief into habit. The Mirage will always have new tricks, new clocks, new timers with velvet voices. Keep a small hourglass on your desk or in your mind. Flip it when decisions knock. Let the sand do what it's done since deserts were seas. Measure a pace older than anyone's urgency. Walk. Trick 30. The chaos reward. Conditioning through intermittent kindness. They don't need to be cruel to break you. They only need to be unpredictable. Warmth and weather rotate without forecast. Praise on Monday for the same behavior punished. On Friday. A kiss for the joke that later earns a lecture. The dog you become isn't trained by beatings. It's trained by the treat that arrives not every time you sit but every fourth, then the second time, then not for a week, then 3 in a day. Dopamine is a slot machine with your name on it. Your brain, ancient and earnest, learns to pull the lever even when the lever breaks your hand. Intermittent kindness feels like depth. When sweetness is rare, it grows meaning faster than grass grows after rain. You stop evaluating quality. You index on relief. The ridiculous becomes rational. They were awful this month, but Tuesday's message? No one has ever written me something like that. You remember the Tuesday with religious clarity. You build altars to Tuesdays. You forget that calendars have 30 other squares, and most are circled in red. You don't leave a casino after a jackpot. You double down. That's how houses win. The kindness is customized. They learn your lever. For one person, it's public praise, an Instagram caption that makes your mother cry. For another, it's touch at precisely the moment you go numb. For another, it's competence. Stepping in with competence so devastatingly helpful, it erases a week's worth of intimidation. They discover which version of tenderness your nervous system experiences as oxygen, and they ration it with care. This is not always conscious malice. Some learned love in homes where the weather broke the schedule. Some think passion equals volatility because the quiet felt like absence. Intent doesn't change effect. A body trained by chaos becomes loyal to chaos makers. Workplaces run this experiment at scale. The boss who explodes quarterly and then showers the team with bonuses and handwritten notes. The company that starves communication and then throws a summit with fireworks. Everyone survives by myth-making. We're a family. We're in it together. We're pirates. We thrive in ambiguity. Pirates die young. Ambiguity is a tax. The dopamine cycle will have you cheering rescheduled deadlines as wins rather than mourning the burnout that required the charade. You'll begin to measure your worth by your ability to metabolize whiplash. Resilience is holy. Martyrdom is a brand. The cure isn't to outlaw joy or reject gifts. The cure is to change the reward schedule. You feed yourself steadily so you stop confusing a treat for a meal. You build routines that drip dopamine without drama. Long hot showers, pages written, miles walked, dinners with people who don't require a dress rehearsal of your personality. The calmer your internal economy, the less impressive their coin. When they bring confetti after weeks of quiet contempt, you thank the paper and sweep the floor. In the relationship, convert your evaluations from episodic to patterned. Keep a journal not of feelings but of behaviors, both theirs and yours. Track frequency, not intensity. Kindness that appears in spikes and vanishes in valleys is not kindness, it's bait. If you map the spikes and see they coincide with your attempts to leave, your attempts to shine without them, or the end of every month when they get lonely, you have a training schedule, not love. When your body screams, but the good days answer with math, 30% good is still failing where survival is graded on a curve. You will hate this at first. Spreadsheets seduce no one's inner poet, but a poet who can count survives the casino with their verse intact. Share the pattern with someone not charmed by your person's perfume. Am I missing the nuance, you'll ask? Sometimes you are. Sometimes they'll point to your own spikes, your own baiting, your own schedule of tenderness tied to anxiety. Intermittence is contagious. Use the mirror to clean your side without volunteering to carry a circus. If you confront them, leave romance at the door. Bring a calendar. 3 weeks of chill contempt, 2 days of delight, then 4 days of vanishing. That's the loop. I'm not living in it. Don't litigate their origin story unless they open it meaningfully. My parents were chaotic, explains, it doesn't excuse. Here's my therapist's number, helps. Here's my horoscope, does not. Set the requirement plainly. If kindness requires chaos to taste like kindness, I can't be here. I need steady. Healthy. Partners will say, I don't know how yet, but I'll learn. Controllers will accuse you of being boring, of asking for lukewarm. They need your roller coaster to feel alive. Get off and walk. Hills exist that won't break your neck. Then practice holding your joy even when kindness arrives. Don't hand credit for your sunshine to the person who opened the curtains this time. The sun was there on Tuesday, on Friday, on all the days they forgot your name. Let their good sit where it belongs, in the ledger, under good, without letting it write over the debits. You are not a mean accountant for balancing. You are someone who learned the trick of living. Treat love like water, not like fireworks. You'll still gasp sometimes at the spectacular, but you won't burn your eyebrows off to see it again. Trick 31. The moral mask. Manipulation in the name of good. They don't ask you to betray your values. They narrate their wants as your values. As people of integrity, if we care about justice, then, obviously, as a good partner, parent, friend, you must. The sentence wears the livery of virtue and commands like a general. To dissent feels like defecting from your own side. You want to live ethically. You want to be kind, fair, responsible. They convert those wants into levers. Suddenly the choice isn't between two schedules or two boundaries. It's between being a good person and being a disappointment. Most of us will choose halo over hunger. They count on that. The mask thrives in movements and in families alike. In a cause, the manipulator hides inside consensus. They summon the community to silence your particularity. We don't do that here. That's not who we are. Ask who we is, and the answer is a shrug that points to slogans. In a home, the mask becomes tradition, culture, scripture, the way our people behave. We take care of our own, they say, meaning me. We forgive, they say, meaning now. We honor, they say, meaning be quiet. Good words become dog leashes. You'll notice the mask most when virtue seems to run in only one direction, toward their comfort. Forgiveness is demanded from you, accountability from you, generosity from you, patience from you, rarely from them. Any attempt to reverse the flow is called selfish or heretical. Your desire to be seen as good turns into a theater where you act contrition without end. If you ever try to leave the stage, the audience, curated by them, gasps. You bow to stop. The sound. Applause, when it comes, covers the fact that nothing true happened. The mask speaks fluently and therapy speak too. It's not trauma-informed to ask that. You're violating my boundaries by having needs. This isn't a safe space if you disagree. These sentences have righteous uses. In manipulative mouths, they become batons. You are not allowed to set a standard because the standard triggers them. You are not allowed to ask for repair because the asking is violence. Safety becomes a moat around a castle where one person gets to do as they please, while the rest of you tiptoe on eggs that never hatch. How do you meet a piety that polices? First, separate values from vectors. I share the value. I disagree with your conclusion. Repeat it like a rosary. I care deeply about fairness. I do not accept that fairness requires X. I believe in forgiveness. I will choose the timing. I honor our culture. I refuse the part that hurts me. They'll accuse you of relativism. You're practicing adulthood, the art of applying principles with context instead of worshipping slogans. Slogans make for quick chants and poor maps. Second, force specificity. What precisely is the harm if I do Y? What exactly is asked of me? For how long? What do you owe in return? The mask hates nouns, dates, and numbers. It prefers incantations. Bring a pen. If the good requires unlimited, unilateral sacrifice, write that down. Then ask if that's what's actually being requested. If they say yes, you have a decision. If they say no but keep acting like yes, you have data. Third, diversify your moral mentors. If a single person or group is your entire source of how to be, you will be easy to conscript. Read beyond one canon. Pray in a different room. Ask a grandmother who survived a century what patience actually costs. Join a community that lets dissent sit in the front pew. The broader your counsel, the less a single charismatic can bend your conscience into a shape that looks like piety and feels like a harness. Fourth, practice private goodness. Give in ways no one can clap for. Tell truths no one can retweet. Keep promises to yourself that earn no badge. The more your morality becomes a quiet daily thing, the less susceptible you'll be to public sermons on what good people like. Yours must do. Private good makes you humble enough to admit when you're wrong and sturdy enough to refuse when you're right. Finally, reclaim the right to be seen as bad by systems that stay functional only if you keep bleeding for them. Some rooms will narrate your boundary as betrayal forever. Let them. Your ethics are not a town square referendum. They are a covenant between you and the life you refuse to waste. If that sounds grandiose, write it smaller. I'm going to bed on time. I'm telling the truth. I'm choosing what doesn't make me hate myself in the morning. Watch how quickly the mask loses power when goodness stops being something you prove and starts being something you inhabit. And when someone tries to put the mask back on your face, if you were really compassionate, you would answer politely once, "Compassion includes me." Then do the kindest thing you can for both of you. Act in accordance with a conscience that doesn't take attendance. The only halo worth wearing is the one you don't have to point at, while you change the world that's actually yours to touch. Trick 32. The invisible contract. Promises you never agreed to. The first time you break it, you don't know it existed. The scowl, the sulk, the sentence, "I just thought you would." Thought what? "No, I hate texting after 10. Always invite me if you're out." Pick up on the second ring. The rule reveals itself in the rupture. You apologize because you are courteous, and because surprise rules feel like a test you should have studied for. You promise to do better without asking the real question. Who wrote this contract, and when did you sign? Invisible contracts bind most tightly where culture or family taught you that consideration is telepathy. If you loved me, you'd just know. Perhaps you grew up reading rooms to survive. You became an expert in micro-weather, breezes that no one else felt, drafts under doors, the exact sound a fork makes before a storm. That superpower is now being weaponized against you. You are expected to preempt. You are scolded for guessing wrong. You begin to live in a posture of apology, always already guilty of something you didn't know existed until this minute. Some contracts are elaborate, entire constitutions passed in the night. We never go to bed angry, which translates to we never stop talking even when talking hurts worse than sleep. We split everything down the middle, until earnings aren't equal and time isn't either, and the math begins to feel like a grudge. We tell each other everything, which means I'm entitled to your interior without limit. Others are petty and proliferate like weeds. Where shoes go, what counts as checking in, whether silence equals consent for plans. You can spend a life paying fines for codes you never read. The manipulator benefits most when the contract is both invisible and holy. That's just how decent people act, they say, pulling morality around preference like a curtain around a shower. All couples do this. Real friends would. In our culture, it's understood. Some of it is true. Some of it is a spell. The test is consent. Values that can't survive a question are not values. They're Velcro for control. Ask, do I agree? Ask, if I don't, what happens? If the answer to the second question is exile or slander, you found a cult, not a covenant. The workplace writes these contracts in invisible ink, too. We're a startup, we hustle, meaning nights and weekends belong to us. We're flat, no hierarchy, meaning power exists, it's just unaccountable. You only learn the clauses when you accidentally trip one and find yourself outside a meeting, for reasons no one can name out loud. You internalize the clauses and start policing others. Now you're the one frowning at a colleague who dares to leave at 6. Invisible contracts recruit the harmed into their enforcement. That's how they scale. How do you renegotiate air? Start by making the contract visible. Write down what you are apparently expected to do. Have the silly courage to say it out loud, even if it sounds trivial. It seems like there's an expectation I text every hour when I'm out. Is that your expectation? Let them answer. If they hedge, it's just nice. Translate hedges into terms. Would you like me to? If yes, negotiate scope. On weeknights, not when I'm in a movie, not when I'm traveling for work. You are not being pedantic. You are building a shared map. Next, add reciprocity in ink. If I text hourly when I'm out, what do I receive in parallel? This isn't tit for tat. It's how adults ensure that expectations don't become tributaries flowing in one direction. Watch their face. People who want partnership lean in. People who want service glare. You don't need to win the glare. You need to notice it. Then decline contracts you never would have signed if given the choice. I won't agree to tell you everything. I will agree to truthful answers when you ask respectful questions. I won't promise, never. Go to bed angry. I will promise to circle back after sleep. I won't accept you should know. I will accept please do X with as much lead time as possible. Expect to be called unromantic. Unromantic is just what romance calls clarity before it learns to breathe in it. Paradoxically, clarity frees affection from resentment. You can be tender when you're not dodging tripwires. Keep a list of your own invisible contracts, the ones you've been enforcing without ever asking out loud. Birthdays matter. Being on time is love. Don't talk to me before. Coffee. Share them. Let some die. Keep the ones that make your life kind and negotiable. You will feel overexposed. You will sound, in your ears, like a person who needs too much. You don't. You simply stopped outsourcing to mind reading what belongs to mouths. In organizations, ask for charters where culture has been doing the dirty work. What does ownership mean here? What is after hours and who decides? How are decisions made when we're flat? If the answer to any of this is laughter, find a place where your sanity won't be charged as a luxury tax. If you choose to stay, choose to stop pretending you didn't choose. Invisible contracts steal agency first and blame second. Visible contracts fail faster and let you pick new ones sooner. Finally, accept that some people need invisibility to feel loved. They were raised on demonstrations without words, on plates of fruit left at the door, on calendars read through. Sighs on the magic trick of being known without being asked. Honor the poetry. Keep the magic where it makes sense. But don't let magic run your life. Magic becomes resentment when the trick fails. Partnership becomes devotion when the trick is replaced by truth. There is a sweet peace at the end of this. Not having to guess, not having to teach someone else a weather you can't even forecast. You'll break a few contracts and be called selfish by people who benefited from your confusion. Let the names pass. Write the agreements you can keep. Keep the agreements you write. And when someone says, "I just thought you would," smile. If you love them and say, "Ask me," then watch the miracle of love learning a new spell, please. Trick 33. The calm trap. Disarming suspicion through stillness. Not all control arrives as volume. Some of it arrives as quiet competence, a serenity so composed it feels like shelter after a storm. They don't raise their voice. They lower the room. Where others flail, they fold napkins. Where others explain, they edit. No fuss, they say. And suddenly fuss feels like a moral failure rather than a signal that something in you needs air. You relax because relaxation seems like the appropriate response to a person who never looks rattled. The trap doesn't spring with a bang. It settles with a sigh, yours. Calm is not the villain. Regulated nervous systems are a gift. The manipulation begins when calm becomes currency, and then cudgel, the standard by which your reality is discounted. You bring a concern, and it is weighed on their scale. If the pointer doesn't twitch, your concern is dramatic. You name a pattern, and because their pulse remains slow, the pattern is overstated. You cry and your tears are interpreted not as information, but as a failure to achieve their discipline. The hierarchy is set. Composed equals correct. Your sensations learn to dress for court. This works because it flatters your aspirations. You want to be steady. You want to be the person who doesn't shatter at every wobble. You start copying their poise, not to grow but to avoid their eyebrow. You pause before speaking, edit adjectives into data points, present your hurt like a quarterly report. Growth can look like this, so can performance. The giveaway is what happens after you comply. Do you get curiosity or a gold star for being manageable? If calm is the price of entry, rather than the byproduct of being met, you're paying with your instincts. The calm trap turns conflict into a test you must pass. They pick topics, tones, timelines that optimize for their comfort. Let's not do this now. Keep this short. Stick to facts. Reasonable requests occasionally, but when every heated moment is rescheduled to the hour that never comes, when facts excludes the impact on your body, when brevity becomes a muzzle, you learn to package the unsayable into polite sentences and then hate yourself for still sounding too much. The result is eerie. You live inside a low-volume relationship that is nevertheless deafening in its silence about what matters. There's a corporate cousin to this trick. Leaders who weaponize equanimity reward only the dissent that arrives. In immaculate format. Bring me solutions, not problems. Assume positive intent. No drama. Sounds healthy until positive intent shields incompetence. Solutions only. Silence is early warnings, and no drama means no passion, no urgency, no naming of harms. The calm culture produces clean decks and dirty closets. Meanwhile, the person who raises the alarm at the volume the emergency requires is marked as the problem. Firefighters get written up for sounding the siren. In intimacy, the calm trap can be exquisitely tender. They soothe you like a weighted blanket. Learn your storms, remember your triggers, stroke your hair through the worst night. Then, subtly, sweetly, they start selecting your weather. They suggest you skip the friend who stirs you up. They praise the version of you that never escalates. They kiss you most when you're resigned. You begin to associate love with your own muting. And because their calm is real, because in many rooms it truly keeps you safe, you pay with a currency you can't afford. Your aliveness in those rooms where being fully awake will make waves. So how do you tell the difference between the steady hand that steadies you and the steady hand that stills you? Look at what their calm makes possible. Does it open space for the messy truth, or does it make only tidy truths tolerable? Do they relax when you regain your voice, or only when you lower it? Do they use their composure to stay present with your storm, or as precedent to insist you never storm again? Practice refusing calm as a prerequisite for care. I'm not regulated yet, and I still need you to listen. If they truly value you, they'll widen their window rather than insist you climb into theirs first. If they can't tolerate your heat, they can set a boundaried container. I'll listen for 20 minutes, then I need a break, without evaluating your temperature as wrong. When they redirect, talk to me when you're rational. Translate, talk to me when you sound like me. Then decide if mirroring is intimacy or mimicry. Reclaim your own regulation as a choice, not a performance. Calm that you choose to access. Your clarity is power. Calm that you perform to avoid someone else's judgment is a costume. You'll feel the difference in your jaw, in the way relief arrives. Chosen calm relaxes. Coerced calm numbs. If you realize you've been numbing, don't swing to chaos to prove you're alive. Let anger arrive like a full voice, not a scream. Let tears come as water, not flood. Learn nervous system skills for you, not for grades. Breath that belongs to your lungs, not to someone's rubric. In organizations, write policies that welcome heat without letting it burn the house. We escalate emotionally when stakes are high. Here's how we handle that with care. Put de-escalation tools in the handbook alongside explicit commitments to name harm, even when voices shake. Teach leaders to hear intensity as signal, not sin. Audit how often tone is used to exile content. If the answer is often, you've built an elegance cult, not a team. Finally, give yourself permission to love the calm and refuse the trap. You can keep the slow dinners, the sure hands, the steady mornings. You can keep the friend whose presence lowers your blood pressure. You can keep the manager whose voice makes a crisis navigable. And you can say whenever needed, your calm isn't a court, my feeling isn't a felony. Watch who can hold that sentence without making you stand trial for saying it. Those are your people. The rest are just quiet rooms with signs that Red peace on the door and silence yourself in the fine print. Trick 34, the redirection trick, turning blame into confusion. If the contradiction dance, trick 17, is about destabilizing standards, redirection is about rerouting attention. You point at the thing, the lie, the missed promise, the cutting. Joke, and before your finger lands, the air shifts. Why are you bringing this up now? Look at your tone. What about the time you... Can we talk about how this makes me feel? You were in a conversation about impact. You're now in a maze about timing, delivery, equivalence, and their woundedness. The original point is somewhere behind you, growing smaller each minute. You spend proving that you're not crazy, cruel, or hypocritical. Redirection is efficient because it doesn't require denial. They can concede the fact and still escape the consequence by making the frame the fight. "I'm sorry you feel that way" is not an apology. It is a change of subject from what they did to how you experienced it. "I hear your perception" moves the locus from reality to viewpoint, from repairable action to debatable narrative. "You always do this when I've had a hard day," takes your hand off the lever and presses yours instead. Now you must justify your timing before they will consider your content. By the time you win the timing debate, you won't. The impetus for repair has cooled. The trick also recruits fairness as a weapon. You name their harm, they name yours, not equal in weight, but adjacent enough to create fog. This is not mutual accountability, it's misdirection by arithmetic. "We both messed up" becomes an eraser across a paragraph that should end with their specific responsibility. You, being conscientious, consider their point. You are always willing to self-examine. That willingness is the opening. They are not wrong that you could have been kinder, earlier, clearer. But kindness and punctuality are not the topic is the thing you saw. And while you audit your delivery, the thing scuttles under the couch. Sometimes redirection comes wrapped in pedagogy. This conversation would be more productive if you used I statements. I need you to avoid absolute language. Could you regulate before we continue? Useful skills in healthy rooms, strategic detours in unhealthy ones. You start editing yourself live, trying to pass the test so you can get back to the point. But the point keeps receding, because the test is the point. Keep you iterating on presentation until content times out. There is a subtler version, redirection, into abstraction. You say, "When you mocked me in front of your friends, I felt humiliated." They say humor is complicated, and embark on a treatise about irony, their family's banter style, the sociology of teasing. You are now arguing anthropology with a person who could have said, "I'm sorry I hurt you, I won't do it again." The intellect is a gorgeous place to hide from responsibility. How do you hold the beam on the subject long enough to get to repair? Name the move without fury. We're off topic. That's a separate issue. We can discuss tone timing later. Right now we're on the behavior. Write it down if you must, literally. Agenda 1, you posted the private message. 2, next, how I brought it up. This feels ridiculous in a kitchen. It is not. Redirection thrives in haze. Ink is a disinfectant. Refuse equivalents you didn't agree to. Yes, I was late last week. Tonight we're talking about you lying. If they insist on merging, decouple with sequence. I'll schedule a time to own my lateness tomorrow. Tonight, we stay here. When they tug on your conscience, how? Can you sleep without addressing your part? Answer with adult tempo. Easily, because this is the part we agreed to now. You will feel like a villain. That feeling is the price of not being drafted into a never-ending trial where your prosecution of one harm is always exchanged for a plea bargain about your flaws. If they pivot to their hurt, it breaks my heart that you think I would. Validate. And return. I get that it hurts to be seen this way, the behavior still happened. If they swing the light onto your tone, you're being harsh, translate into a parameter. I'll lower my volume, the content remains. If they reach for history, what about 2021? Offer a calendar. We can schedule 2021. Right now is 2025. Calm repetition beats brilliant rhetoric. Redirection depends on your hunger to be understood. Starve the hunger during the conflict. Feed it later with people who won't make you juggle fire to earn comprehension. There's an inner version of the trick you must catch too, the way you redirect yourself out of discomfort. Notice how quickly your mind offers detours. Maybe, I should have said it sweeter. Maybe I'm making a big deal. Maybe I should wait. Maybe I'm the common denominator. Some of this is humility. Some of it is your training to keep the peace at the cost of the point. Practice holding two truths without merging them. I could have been kinder, and I'm right about what happened. Then act on the rightness. Apologize for your tone after repair, not instead of it. In teams, build redirection resistance into the process. In retros, ban whataboutism for the first 10 minutes. We will name the impact of X without mentioning Y. Then we will switch. Use facilitators empowered to say off-topic without being accused of bias. Write repair steps before debate about framing. Move the work forward with commits, not conclusions. Action, rotate code reviews. Owner, A, date, Friday. Redirection hates doing things. It prefers endless discussion. Force it to produce. Finally, accept that some people deploy redirection because the alternative would collapse their self-concept. Taking a clean hit feels like death to an identity. Organized around being the good one, the smart one, the victim, the leader. You cannot remodel another person's ego architecture mid-argument. You can only decline to live inside it. When every beam you shine is rerouted to the ceiling, stop pointing. Say, I won't chase this. Then leave the maze. Real accountability. Doesn't hide when the light moves. It steps into it, squints, and says the words that end so many tricks at once. You're right, I did that. Here's what I'll do now. Trick 35. The confidence theft. Making you doubt your own voice. They don't smash the instrument, they detune it. Confidence theft rarely looks like a direct assault on your ability. It looks like tiny adjustments, an eyebrow when you speak with certainty, a thoughtful after you make a choice, a soft are you sure dropped at the precise moment. Momentum would have carried you across the line. Doubt is planted not as accusation, but as care. I just don't want you to overextend. I'm only thinking of how you'll feel if this flops. It's reasonable enough to pass security, so you let it in. Soon you're frisking yourself on their behalf, second-guessing drafts, deferring decisions, converting instinct into committee. At work, the theft wears mentorship's clothing. Great direction, they say, and then steer you 5 degrees. Off your course. Let's tighten, they smile, and your once clear argument returns to you in a foreign dialect that sounds sophisticated and lands like static. When the meeting ends, people praise your poise while quietly forgetting the point you came to make. You accept the applause as evidence that you're learning how to play the game, not noticing the game has shifted from building to appeasing. You become fluent in reassurance. The product lags. In love, the theft is tender. They call you brilliant, then install themselves as your translator. What you're trying to say becomes a bridge others learn to cross to reach you. You step back because it's easier. A month later, people are addressing them about your work, your boundaries, your preferences. When you try to speak directly, the room waits for their confirmation. They may even nod benevolently, proud to be your conduit. You feel suddenly shy in kitchens you designed. Confidence also erodes at the edges of memory. They correct small details you don't care about, who recommended the book, which street the cafe was on, and you concede because precision matters, because you were never that attached to the map. Concession becomes habit. Habit becomes posture. Now when your body says yes, your mouth says I might be wrong, and the but does a magic trick. It turns you into someone who must be convinced of your own life. People oblige not because you're unconvincing, but because you told them you were. The thief's most effective tool is selective amplification. They repeat your doubts back to you with eloquence. If you confess stage fright, they'll gently wonder if public work is really your lane. If you mention imposter syndrome, they'll become vigilant on your behalf, warning you not to take on anything too visible until you're really ready. Ready becomes a horizon that recedes. Meanwhile, they never hesitate to put their name on your ideas, to stride into rooms you warmed with your labor, to claim mastery in fields where you carry the weight. You applaud because you're decent, and decency is often the first thing we weaponize against ourselves. How do you reclaim the instrument without becoming brittle or needing to prove something in every room? Start by noticing how often you preface truth with apology. Replace I might be wrong, but with I see it this way. Replace I'm not an expert, though, with here's my expertise. Your tone will feel arrogant to you for a week. It won't sound that way outside. That discomfort is not a moral barometer. It's muscle soreness from atrophied confidence waking up. Rewire your calibration loop. Instead of asking the thief for sign-off, route your drafts to someone who wants to make your voice more you. When you receive their edits, ask a new question. Does this sound like me at my most precise? Accept only the changes that sharpen. Decline the ones that sand down edges to fit palates that prefer bland. Keep a version history you can look back on when doubt tries to gaslight you into believing you've always been this soft. Build proofs of competence you can't argue away later. Not victory posters, process notes. After key decisions, write why you chose them and what evidence you had at the time. When outcomes wobble, as they sometimes will, your archive will rescue you from the hindsight shame that thieves love to weaponize. See? You were reckless. No, you were informed and brave, or you were wrong for good reasons. Either way, the record disarms the story that your wins are accidents and your losses are essence. When the thief corrects your micro-details, decide what matters. If being right about the street name doesn't alter the meaning, hold the meaning and let the asphalt go. If they persist, because pedantry is a power move, say thanks doesn't change my point. Repeat it until your nervous system learns that precision is a tool, not a leash. In meetings, protect your sentences from being rerouted through a translator. I'll finish. I'm answering. I've got it. Short, warm, immovable. If they interject under the banner of efficiency, use the same efficiency to re-enter, continuing. There's a grief in admitting you handed the keys to someone who kept moving the car an inch every night. Don't turn grief into a crusade. You don't need to humiliate them to come home to yourself. You need to change the conditions under which your voice is heard. That may mean new collaborators. That may mean leaving a room where your ownership will forever be considered a courtesy title. That may mean a sabbatical from people who love you as long as you're legible to them. First, and there's a mercy too. Check if you've been someone's thief. Where have you edited a partner into sounding like you? Where have you mentored a colleague into invisibility? Return the keys with interest. Name the places you colonized and step out of the way. The habit of taking is contagious. So is the practice of giving back. Finally, reclaim a ritual that requires nobody's blessing, an arena where proof arrives with your own sweat. Lift something heavier than you'd pick for a photo, learn a piece of music to imperfection and perform it anyway. Ship a small complete thing without a counsel. Confidence returns not through argument, but through acts that remind you can hear, decide, do. The instrument didn't break. It was waiting for you to tune it to your pitch. And play. Trick 36. The illusion of recall. When memory becomes manipulation. They don't need to change facts. They only need to change which facts are reachable. The illusion of recall is a labyrinth built from selective retrieval, confident storytelling, and the brain's bias toward coherence. You argue about last winter's party. They produce details like a magician's silk. Color of the coat, exact toast, the playlist order, as if specificity equals truth. Your mind, with fewer accessible files, defers. Later, alone, you'll find a photo that contradicts their sequence. In the moment, though, you ceded the ground because certainty is seductive, and certainty accompanied by compassion. I know this is hard to remember, love. You were upset. Feels like safety. It is not. It is a leash. Some manipulators hoard artifacts. Screenshots, receipts, timestamps line their folders. Evidence can be noble. Here it becomes theater. They present exhibits out of context and narrate them with assurance. You scramble for counter-evidence already playing on their field. Others skip proof entirely and attack your instrument. Your memory is tricky after stress. Your storytelling again. That's your anxious brain. If you've named trauma in your life, they'll deputize it. This is exactly like when your dad overreacted, you're reliving it. Owning your past becomes grounds for dismissing your present. The result is elegant. You begin to fact-check yourself while they speak. Recall can be a couple's currency. They remember the moments that cast them as generous. You remember the ones where you held the house while they traveled with a new dream. They tell the redemption arc at dinner parties, the chapter when they changed, and people clap. You sit beside them and fight an urge to stand and add a footnote. And here are the years afterward, when the change didn't stick on Tuesdays. You silence yourself because you don't want to sound petty, because revisionist history at least gives you both a narrative to live in. But the unspoken becomes a blister. Blisters demand shoes you actually fit. Workplaces wield recall with post-mortems curated by winners. We pivoted in Q2 because we read the market, says the deck, unmentioning the two junior people whose risky memo predicted the shift and got ignored until a senior voice repeated it with new font. Names fade. Logos live. If you try to restore names, you're accused of living in the past. If you accept the summary, you teach yourself not to bother keeping records, and your future self will feel the theft without knowing where it happened. How do you break a spell that uses your own neurons against you without becoming the person? Who carries binders to brunch? Start small and analog. After pivotal conversations, jot 3 sentences. What was agreed? What was promised? By whom? By when? Not to win fights, but to keep your sense-making intact. When the story changes later, you won't have to rely on mood. You'll have a time-stamped memory that doesn't depend on your cortisol levels. Share it if the relationship is healthy enough to tolerate documentation. If the documentation itself is framed as hostility, you've learned something sobering about your context. When they cite your bad memory, refuse the blanket. Sometimes I forget. Sometimes I remember perfectly. Today I remember this. If they present a cinematic recollection, ask for verbs, not adjectives. What did I say exactly? What did you do after? Stories inflated with interpretation shrink under the weight of specifics. If they produce receipts, test the logic chain. This screenshot shows I texted at 10:14. It doesn't prove what you're concluding. Speak like a gentle lawyer when your heart wants to scream. Screaming is valid. It's also easy to dismiss as more evidence that you can't think straight. When the past is invoked to invalidate the present, we resolved this. You forgave me. Separate event from pattern. We resolved the incident. The pattern continues. They'll accuse you of keeping score. You are keeping score. Matches have rules, marriages have too. The point is not to live in endless audit. It's to prevent déjà vu from being used as absolution. If they demand that closure be amnesia, they're asking for immunity, not intimacy. Invite third witnesses where appropriate. A therapist's notes, a friend who was there, a colleague who can confirm who proposed what. Triangulation dissolves solipsism. Do not flood the room with your entire archive. Bring 1 or 2 clean pieces that hold. If the response is to attack, the witness, they never liked me. You're not in a truth-seeking exercise, you're in a reputation war. Decide if that's where you want to spend your seasons. You'll also need to interrogate your own relationship with memory. Where do you embellish to make life livable? Where do you flatten nuance to avoid guilt? Adjust without self-cruelty. Apologize when your certainty outruns your citations, but don't let humility collapse into helplessness. Trust can return to your recall if you train it. Regular journaling, photos with captions that capture context, voice memos after charged events. Over time, your present self will become a trustworthy source for your future self. That bond is one of adulthood's quietest luxuries. If you choose to stay with someone who struggles with honest recall, propose shared practices, monthly debriefs with written agreements. A rule that we don't argue about what can be checked, then actually check. Timeouts when either of you feels the urge to narrate the other's mind. If they resist every structure that would anchor the truth, stop arguing and start deciding. A relationship that requires your forgetfulness to function isn't a partnership. It's a story hour. There's a tenderness on the far side of all this. The day you remember a weekend correctly and they say, "You're right, I blanked that out." Not as a weapon against themselves, not as a plea for you to comfort their Shame, but as an act of respect for reality. That respect is the ground love grows in, not the glamorous flowers, not the dramatic vines, just the dirt. Solid, unglamorous, necessary. Build on it. Let your recollections become less about winning and more about weaving a fabric neither of you has to tear to stay warm. Trick 37. The identity collapse. Erasing the self to rebuild control. Some tricks sand you down. This one bulldozers. Identity collapse is the controlled demolition of you, carried out with a mix of crisis, confession, and conversion. It often follows a season in which you have finally begun to set terms to resist. The manipulator perceives the threat and does not argue your boundaries. They annihilate the version of themselves that your boundaries were designed to constrain. You're right, they say, eyes wet. I've been living a lie. I don't know who I am. Everything must change. You exhale in relief because collapse sounds like repentance, but what's being torn down is not the house, it's the address, so your map no longer works. Phase 1 is theatrical humility. They renounce personas, delete accounts, resign roles, burn wardrobes, shave heads, toss rings, gestures with the gravity of ritual. They reference books and retreats, therapists and revelations. They tell everyone they're not who you think they are, which conveniently dissolves debts your pain had already itemized. If you point to last month's harm, they answer, "That was the old me," as if harm were a haircut. They ask for patience while they rebuild from scratch, and because you are decent, and because you have longed to be met, you grant them the kind postponement that has historically been a trap. Phase 2 is curriculum. Having raised the old identity, they begin teaching the new one to the room. Language shifts. They discover frameworks that recode your memories, spiritualize their failings, reframe their appetites as archetypes. The vocabulary is clean, sometimes beautiful. You spot yourself in the footnotes, a cautionary tale of how they previously operated from scarcity or fear. In private, you attempt to locate your needs within the new doctrine. Oddly, many don't fit. Why? Because the rebuild centers their comfort, again, only now with upgraded insulation. Your boundary becomes reactivity, your ask becomes control, your hurt becomes attachment to suffering. If you protest, you're told you're addicted to the old dynamic. Which dynamic? The one where reality counted. Phase 3 is staffing. The new identity comes with new friends, disciples, mentors, witnesses who affirm the transformation. They arrive adoring and vigilant, ready to defend the chrysalis from negative energy, by which they mean accountability. You become the unsupportive spouse, the closed-minded ex, the friend who can't handle growth. In rooms where once you were the most reasonable person, you are now the problem statement. The isolating effect is efficient. It's harder to trust your eyes when everyone else is dazzled by the light show. The old smear campaign, "They're crazy," becomes a kinder one. "They're stuck." It lands softer and cuts deeper. Notice the time distortions. The past is now irrelevant because it belonged to a previous version. The present is chaotic because rebirth is messy. The future is promised but non-negotiable because this is who I am now. You are asked to tolerate amnesia, chaos, and destiny in the same month. The double bind writes itself. If you leave, you didn't believe in change. If you stay, you consent to an experiment where your role is guinea pig, not partner. How do you meet a demolition without becoming rubble? You separate transformation from jurisdiction. You can applaud their work while refusing displacement. Become whoever you're becoming. The agreements remain. Put them in writing if you must. The debt schedule, the co-parenting plan, the communication cadence, the therapy commitments. New identities don't erase old obligations. If "old me promised that" is their refrain, you're not witnessing growth. You're watching a bankruptcy filed under a new legal name. Next, require fruits over flames. Set horizon markers that are behavioral, not performative. 6 months without the pattern. Money paid on time. No third-party triangulation. Calm around your no. Don't grade sermons. Grade calendars. If the markers don't arrive, treat the collapse as camouflage. That will feel cruel. It's not. The tender act is telling reality, the truth. Insist on sovereignty for yourself mid-rebuild. You do not have to sign up for their school. Your practice is yours. Mine is mine. You can step out of ceremonies you didn't consent to, even if the altar looks modern and the incense smells like insight. You can say, "Your teacher is not my authority. If the new circle needs you to kneel, walk." Finally, check your own appetite for salvation stories. Did you want the phoenix so much that you're squinting past smoke? It's human to long for a turn. Keep the longing. Drop the leash. If they truly transformed, they'll meet you at the same table you named before the fire. If they didn't, you'll know by how quickly rebirth becomes a shield against the oldest measure of all. Do I feel safer and more myself here? If the answer is no, rise. Change is real and beautiful. So is leaving when someone uses it to erase the bill. Trick 38. The projection trap, accusing you of their own sins. It begins with indictment. You're so selfish. You never listen. You're flirting with everyone. You're controlling. Perhaps you flinch because you're conscientious and can locate a sliver of truth. Most virtues have shadows. You sift yourself for evidence because self-examination is your habit. Meanwhile, the real sleight of hand has already occurred. The accuser has airdropped their confession into your conscience, and you're metabolizing it as guilt on their behalf. Projection works because it borrows your integrity. You care about being fair. They cash that care like a check. If you defend yourself, you're deflecting. If you offer counterexamples, you're keeping score. If you turn the mirror around, you interrupted me 5 times. You're weaponizing. Therapy language. The trap seals when you begin to pre-repent for things you haven't done, so you can demonstrate good faith. Now you're managing their anxiety about their behavior, which is an elegant way of guaranteeing they never have to. The accusations usually arrive near the fault lines of their own life. The unfaithful worry you'll cheat. The liar polices. Nuance in your statements. The financial wreck frets about your spending. The boundaryless call you invasive. When you set a simple limit, they call it abandonment because that's what their limits were called when they were young. Their history becomes your indictment. You begin to live as the defendant in a case where the evidence is mostly vibes. Projection also conscripts witnesses. They'll retell a conflict to friends with angles that emphasize your alleged flaw. "I just don't feel safe. They're so controlling," they whisper to a chorus of nods. Control? You asked for a time to talk without phones. But now you're trying to convince their audience you're not the villain in their play. That is a losing theater. The audience was cast precisely because they applaud on cue. The inner version is subtler and just as corrosive. You know their wound so well that you preemptively apologize to it. You stop going out because it triggers their abandonment fears. You overdisclose every text because they fear betrayal. You quiet your ambition because it inflames their envy. You will call this love. It is management. It protects their projection, while eroding your life. Antidote, jurisdiction, and naming. That's about you. Say it inwardly first, so your nervous system remembers the boundary. Out loud, strip the indictment to verbs. You're accusing me of X. Here are the facts. I did Y. I did not do X. Refuse adjective wars. Selfish, cold. Adjectives belong to stories, not courts. If they escalate to more global labels, downgrade to the narrowest true sentence. On Tuesday, I left at 8. You didn't like that. We can discuss Tuesday. Invite third-party calibration, sparingly but strategically. A couples therapist, a mutually respected elder. A process with rules. Projection thrives in private, where your care can be harvested without friction. In structured spaces, you can say, "I am being accused of behavior that resembles theirs. I want help disentangling." If structure itself is framed as cruelty, I can't believe you need to bring strangers into this. Translate. My story only works if I tell it unchallenged. Decide accordingly. Stop offering alibis for crimes you didn't commit. When they say you never listen, reply, "I'm listening now." Name one specific example and what would repair it. If the examples are real, repair. If they're imaginary or projections, you've set a standard they can't meet. Specificity. They will either come to the table or flip it. Either outcome is information. And investigate where you project, too. It'll make you cleaner and quieter in the fight. Own your shadows directly. I interrupted. I was anxious. Paradoxically, clean confession de-weaponizes theirs. You will be less snag-gable by false charges when you are fluent in naming your true ones. The endgame of projection is custody of the narrative. Take yours back by refusing to play the part assigned. When the same accusation loops, set a cap. We've discussed this 3 times. Without new evidence, I won't revisit it. Walk when necessary. You're not abandoning them to their fear. You're refusing to become its avatar. The only thing worse than being miscast is staying on stage to prove you shouldn't have been. Trick 39. The emotional reset. Using breakdown as rebirth of control. Where the controlled collapse, trick 23, weaponizes weakness to dodge consequence, the emotional reset weaponizes recovery to reset rules. The pattern, a blow-up, theirs. A fallout, yours. A white flag conversation in which new terms are set. Tender, specific, seemingly adult. For a week the air is cathedral quiet. They touch your back as they pass. They say, of course, to reasonable asks. They send calendar invites titled check-in. Your nervous system, ragged from months of turbulence, drinks the stillness, like rain, and then gently the creep. A boundary nudged, a joke at your expense, a forgotten promise. When you name it, they say, don't drag us back. The reset isn't repair. It's amnesty. Resets often follow spectacular remorse. I scared myself, they whisper, voice hoarse with apology. They may cry, write letters, book therapy, buy books, return keys. Some of it is sincere. Sincerity isn't the question. The question is continuity. The reset becomes manipulation when it functions like a seasonal detox that justifies the next binge. The new leaf is always turning. The tree never moves. You'll notice the reset arrives with new language, agreements. You consent to because they sound kind. Let's never go to bed angry. Translation, let's talk until you are exhausted. Let's check in before big plans. Translation, let me veto late. Let's keep our issues between us. Translation, no witnesses. The reset grants them reputational credit for doing the work and grants them veto power over how the work is audited. Time distorts here too. The reset sells a fresh present that abolishes the recent past. Bring up last month's wound and you're castigated for living in history. Decline to trust immediately and you're punishing progress. Meanwhile, the future is mortgaged. To hope again. You're asked to suspend disbelief while they integrate. Integration is measurable, hope is not. The trick depends on your confusion between the two. What keeps you returning is not foolishness. It's the temporary fidelity between promise and behavior. For 10 days, they are the person you wished for. You don't want to be the kind of cynic who can't believe in improvement. You also don't want to be the kind of realist who confuses a sprint for a marathon. So you choose faith, and the house collects again. The antidote is calendar-based trust. Write the terms in sand and the dates in stone. If X happens for 90 days, I'll do Y. X, round concrete behaviors. No insults in conflict. Weekly logistics. Check-in, therapy attended, money accounted for, phone codes shared if chosen and sunsetted later. Y, concrete reciprocals. Moving in, merging plans, dropping a protective routine. When backsliding happens, and it will, don't debate intent. Execute the clause. We pause at day 23, we reset the clock, you will be accused of legalism. Legalism is what people call boundaries when they prefer vibes. Refuse resets that require secrecy. We don't need to involve others this time is often code for, let me regain private control. Pick one outside witness, therapist, elder coach, whose only loyalty is to reality. Document together. If documentation is framed as unromantic, remember, romance without record is how you keep arriving at the same winter wrapped in new scarves. Create non-negotiables you won't renegotiate at a reset high. Sleep minimums. No yelling, no property damage, no threats, no drunk fights, no silent treatment beyond a set timeout. If breached, consequence auto-triggers. You leave the room, the house, the weekend, the lease, not to prove a point, to keep your nervous system from being taught that your safety is negotiable under moonlight. Finally, rewire your own reward loop, so calm doesn't taste like a miracle you must overpay to keep. Build a life where steady is standard. Friends who text back when they say, routines that deliver small joy on schedule. Work whose feedback loop doesn't require a roller coaster to feel alive. The more your body learns that peace is ordinary, the less susceptible you'll be to a flash sale serenity that always ends with last chance. When a reset is real, it will feel boring in the best way. Fewer speeches, fewer ceremonies, more Tuesday competence. You won't be asked to clap for daily decency. You'll be asked what you want for dinner, and the question will not be a test. Trick 40. The liberation. When you stop feeding the game. Liberation isn't the cinematic slam of a door, it's the quieter sequence of decisions by which you starve a system that used to eat your days. The game ends when you stop playing, not when the opponent repents or the crowd understands your side. That is both the lonely news and the empowering one. The lever is in a place you can actually reach. It begins with naming. You call what happened what it was, without courtroom. Flourish or self-indictment. Not we were toxic, which spreads blame like butter until it melts. They did X, I did Y, here's how the loop fed itself. You resist the twin gravities of martyrdom and mutual mush. Clarity feels unsatisfying at first. No big monologue, no vindication montage. Then you feel your breath drop lower. That's the sound of your life moving back into your own chest. Next comes subtraction. You remove yourself from arenas where your dignity depends on someone else's mood. You do not go to the debate you used to rehearse in the shower. You do not open the app at midnight. You cancel the cycle of prove I'm good that always ended where it started. You block if necessary. You don't narrate the block as righteous. You narrate it as maintenance. This is how I keep my roof from leaking. People will call you cold. Warmth returns when the wind stops. You repopulate your days with witnesses who don't require smallness as admission, not a new chorus to hate. The same villain. An actual village. Friends who ask better questions than what did they do now. Work that rewards consistency over spectacle. Rituals that produce joy with no audience. You'll be tempted to replace the old game with a mirror version where you win. Decline. You're building something more boring and more holy, a life too occupied to be recruited. Liberation includes grief, not only for what they did, but for what you did to survive. The jokes you learned to tell at your own expense, the calendar you handed to someone else, the dimmer switch you installed on your own hunger. Grieve like a responsible ancestor. Sit with the younger you who struck those bargains, thank them. They kept you alive, then relieve them of their post. I'll take it from here. You design guardrails so you don't drift back on lonely nights. A rule no reaching out from nostalgia. A rule decisions sleep. A rule if you have to argue your boundary more than twice, you enact it. A rule when someone shows you they cannot hold your no, you downgrade access without fanfare. The TOE rules are not punishment. They are weatherproofing. You deserve a house that doesn't flood whenever someone else leaves the sink on. You study the parts of you that got hooked, not to self-flagellate, to immunize. If tenderness was leveraged, you learn compassion with edges. I care. I won't. Carry. If your appetite was shamed, you practice wanting out loud until your wants don't ask permission to exist. If scarcity was the snare, you build redundancies. Multiple friends, multiple skills, multiple incomes if possible, so one person's silence doesn't turn your life dim. You stop litigating with those who need you guilty to stay comfortable. Some will insist on a story where you are the villain because their sense of safety depends on that geometry. Let them have the movie. You have a kitchen to paint, a walk to take, a book whose margin wants your pencil back. The more ordinary your joy becomes, the less interesting their narrative feels. Your nervous system learns a new thrill. Peace that doesn't need an audience. On the days you wobble and you reach for evidence, not insults. Not they're a monster, but here are the dates and the consequences. Monsters can morph. Facts tend to keep their faces. Then you do one kind thing for your future self. Schedule something to look forward to that doesn't involve them. A workshop, a hike, a dinner, a nap. Liberation is not just leaving, it is arriving somewhere. If you must co-parent, co-work, or coexist, liberation looks like tight apertures, communication channels with single purposes, times, and tones. You don't decorate those hallways with old arguments. You use them and go home. Home is not a person who needs you small to love you. Home is the place you return to yourself intact. Finally, you give away what you learned without turning it into a new identity that devours your days. You help a friend name a pattern. You teach a junior colleague to set a boundary on email. You write a paragraph that might save a stranger an extra year in a bad loop. Then you go outside. The sun is scandalously indifferent to your drama. That indifference is mercy. It means there is a world beyond the game, and it is not waiting for the perfect line from you to begin. Liberation doesn't crown you. It lightens you. One afternoon you'll realize you crossed a street you used to avoid and didn't notice until you were already on the other curb. No trumpet sounded. Your shoulders didn't ask for a medal. You just lived. That's the win. Boredom returning as a blessing, laughter arriving unannounced, the taste of your life without someone else's hands on your tongue. You didn't beat them. You stopped feeding the game. And in the quiet, you became someone you recognize. Not a mirror, not a lesson, not a wound, just you. And here we conclude the episode without closing the door to your inner question. Because what's important isn't memorizing the names of tricks, but rather changing your perspective on them. Eyes that pick up the signal before it turns into a story. A voice that names what's happening without hesitation. One clear step you take from time to time and then move on. If something inside you is moving tonight, it's your voice returning to its rightful place. Don't strive for perfection or the perfect response. Strive for consistency. Say no when it's deserved. Take a break when needed. Choose the calm that serves you, not the calm that calms you. You will stumble, you will certainly stumble. But every time you name the game and act with determination, its balance drops and yours rises. Make a small pact with yourself before you leave. Choose one real situation and apply what you've learned. Send the clear message instead of a hint. Postpone the meeting until the place is ready for respect. Set boundaries without writing an additional essay. Then observe how the power shifts when access to you is no longer free. Remember, the most dangerous tricks come smiling, and your true strength comes quietly, pragmatically, and reproducibly. If this video is an honest reflection, don't ignore it. Like it, it encourages us to keep going. Tell me what you've learned in the comments, share it with those who need it, and stay with us for what's next. Not because we have magic, but because you deserve to face the world with open eyes, respectful phrases, and longer, steadier breaths. Until we meet again, protect yourself with a clear statement and a firm step. Let the rest fall into place.